Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to guide you through your journey into the darkness tonight. I know you have come here to find rest, to slowly drift off to sleep, but be careful, this story may drag you into a world where the darkness lasts longer than necessary. Before we begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to the channel. I am curious, where are you from and what time are you watching this? Now, settle in. Get comfortable. Let the night embrace you. The first night I heard it, a soft, rhythmic scraping echoed faintly above my ceiling, too quiet to complain about, yet insistent enough to slice through the fragile veil between consciousness and dreams. It was 3 a.m. My phone screen glared accusingly in the darkness as I lay rigid beneath the covers, straining to catch every sound, the slow, deliberate scrape, as if heavy furniture were being dragged across old hardwood floors somewhere in apartment 803. I tried to convince myself it was just a restless neighbor, perhaps battling insomnia like me. But something felt off. I had moved into Edificio Paraiso only 4 days earlier, drawn by its faded grandeur and affordable rent nestled deep in downtown Curitiba. The property listing boasted historic charm, a generous euphemism for the building's crumbling Art Deco facade, outdated plumbing, and a lingering scent of mildew that clung to the common areas like a ghost's breath. At 34, freshly divorced and desperate for a new beginning far from Sao Paulo, I couldn't afford to be particular. My apartment on the 7th floor was clean enough, unusually spacious for the city, with a 6-month lease that felt just right for a man adrift and unsure of his next steps. But the building itself seemed to live in perpetual twilight. Narrow hallways flickered with failing fluorescent lights, wallpaper peeling away like old skin, and the ancient elevator groaned with every reluctant ascent, its movements slow and labored, like an arthritic old man. The few neighbors I'd met were mostly elderly, their faces weathered and indifferent, exchanging nothing but curt nods. I preferred it that way. The noises didn't stop the next night. The scraping returned, but now joined by the heavy, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth along the ceiling directly above my bed. At precisely 2:17 a.m., the footsteps ceased, replaced by the unmistakable sound of running water. I imagined a shower left running in the dead of night, the steady cascade echoing through the thin pipes. For 97 minutes, according to my obsessive notes, the water never stopped. By the third night, exhaustion had settled into my bones like concrete. Every noise seemed magnified, shadows growing teeth in the dark. The dragging sound had turned violent, now like furniture being shoved with furious force. The footsteps became frantic, as if someone desperately searching for something they'd lost, their heartbeat pounding through the ceiling. When the water started running, a low, tuneless humming began beneath the steady stream, a vibrating drone that seemed to seep through the pipes and pulse inside my walls. Sleep became impossible. Determined to find answers, I resolved to confront whoever lived above me. Reasonable people, reasonable explanations. I rehearsed what I would say as I climbed the stairs to the 8th floor, bypassing the temperamental elevator, preferring the cold touch of the worn railing. The hallway looked exactly like mine, faded runner carpet stretched beneath flickering lights, doors numbered in peeling brass digits. Standing before apartment 803, I knocked firmly. No answer. Again, longer this time. Silence. Not the silence of an empty room, but a silence thick with presence, as if someone held their breath on the other side. My skin prickled, and I felt eyes watching me from the shadows. Turning, I saw Marcos, the building superintendent, leaning in the stairwell, keys clinking in his gnarled hand. When I told him about the noises, his face tightened. Apartment 803 had been vacant for over 5 years. The owner had moved abroad, leaving the place in eerie limbo. No one had stayed there for more than 3 nights. Marcos warned me to stay away. He told me stories, whispered tales of strange lights flickering through 803's windows at night, of shadows moving when no one was there, and residents who had fled after just hours inside. One tenant even vanished without a trace. Despite the warnings, my curiosity deepened. Each night the noises grew more violent, the sense of something unseen drawing closer, crawling beneath my skin like cold fingers. One evening, I found strange scratches on my ceiling, faint but deliberate, symbols, perhaps, or marks of warning. At times, a whisper slipped beneath the drone of the water, soft syllables I couldn't understand, but that chilled me to the bone. Was my mind fracturing? Was the building itself alive, a sentient prison breathing beneath my feet? Or was something darker, older, trapped in the shadows of 803, trying to reach out? I began to notice subtle changes in myself. Sleep deprivation gnawed at my sanity. Faces in reflections shifted. Dreams bled into waking hours. Every creak and groan felt like a threat. One night, driven beyond fear, I crept into 803. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick, cold and heavy, pressing down like a suffocating shroud. The apartment was frozen in time, furniture draped in white sheets, dust motes dancing in dim moonlight through cracked windows. But the water was still running. And beneath it, the humming persisted. From the far corner, a shadow stirred. A presence that wasn't human. Something ancient, watching, waiting. The boundary between the living and the lost blurred. I was no longer a tenant, but a trespasser in a forgotten nightmare. I fled. But the building never let me go. The noises follow me in the silence of my new apartment. In dreams, I still hear the footsteps pacing, the scraping, and the water running endlessly above my ceiling. And sometimes, when the night is still, I swear I hear a whisper calling my name from the darkness. Not a casual visitor, not a well-meaning relative checking in, nor the real estate agents hoping to sell the place. No one, no soul, had crossed the threshold of apartment 803 for years. I laughed, but the sound that left my lips was hollow, empty, even to my own ears. It was a laugh soaked in disbelief and shadowed by the weight of uncertainty. Clearly, there had to be some mistake. I recounted every detail to Marcos, the building's caretaker, the dragging furniture, the measured pacing footsteps, the relentless shower running in the dead of night. With each description, his weathered face grew darker, more troubled, as if the shadows behind his eyes lengthened. In a voice carefully stripped of emotion, he suggested that old buildings settled in the night, that pipes expanded and contracted like living things, and that perhaps I was simply overtired from the chaos of my recent move. But I was insistent. I needed to see the apartment for myself. After much hesitation, Marcos finally unlocked the door. The moment I stepped inside, a musty breath greeted me, the unmistakable scent of long abandonment and forgotten memories. Dust motes floated lazily in thin beams of sunlight that seeped through the tightly closed blinds. Sheets draped the sparse furniture like funeral shrouds, frozen in a quiet vigil. And the floor. That detail lodged itself deep in my throat, a stone of disbelief. The entire floor was carpeted wall to wall. Carpet. It was impossible to imagine how the scraping noise, sharp and relentless, could have been made by dragging anything across such a soft surface night after night. I moved cautiously into the bathroom. The shower head was bone dry, crusted with the pale scars of mineral deposits, silent and unused for years. Marcos, now visibly uneasy, offered another theory. Perhaps the noises came from another apartment, a trick of sound traveling in the labyrinthine arteries of the building. Maybe the echoes came from below, or through the ventilation ducts, twisting and bending until they reached me. But I knew what I had heard. I knew the sounds came from above. That night, I waited. Tension coiled inside me like a tightly wound spring as midnight passed in suffocating silence. 1 a.m. Still nothing. By 2 o'clock, the skeptical part of my mind began to agree with Marcos. Perhaps it had all been my imagination. The stress of change, loneliness, and sleeplessness manifesting in auditory hallucinations. I was on the edge of surrender, drifting toward uneasy sleep, when it began again. Not from above. From inside my own apartment. The scraping sound emerged slowly, deliberately, impossibly close, barely more than a breath away. My lungs seized as cold sweat erupted across my skin, slick, clammy, terrifying. I lay paralyzed, ears straining in the darkness, heart hammering like a wild thing desperate to escape. Something heavy was moving across my floor, inch by excruciating inch, dragging itself toward my bedroom. The sound halted just outside my door. The handle turned, slowly, almost tentatively, metal grinding softly against metal, a whispered protest in the stillness. My door remained locked. A habit born of childhood fears, a small comfort I had never abandoned. But the handle kept turning, back and forth, urgency mounting with every rotation. Then came the knocking. Not the sharp rap of knuckles, but something softer, wetter, like damp flesh slapping against worn wood. Then, nothing. I must have lost consciousness. When I awoke, sunlight spilled warmly through my curtains. My sheets were soaked through with sweat, my throat raw and sore, as if I had been screaming into the void. I searched my apartment with trembling hands, desperate for signs of intrusion. No wet footprints on the hardwood. No shifted furniture. Nothing. Only silence. I convinced myself it was a vivid nightmare. A cruel child of suggestion, loneliness, and exhaustion. That day, driven by a restless need to understand, I dove into the building's history. The Edificio Paraiso, constructed in 1937, had endured earthquakes, political upheaval, and decades of neglect. Online forums praised its character and affordable rents, but no whispers of darkness surfaced. I expanded my search, looking for any incident reports linked to the address. Only mundane complaints about leaky pipes, creaky floors, and the occasional noisy neighbor. But then, on a hunch born from desperation, I searched specifically for apartment 803. A single, small news item surfaced. 5 years prior, the elderly occupant had been found lifeless in her bathtub after neighbors reported water leaking into apartments below. The article was vague, foul play ruled out, but the story was wrapped in silence, the details left to shadow. This is where the real story begins. After reading the article, a strange weight settled over me, not just curiosity, but an almost magnetic pull, as if apartment 803 were whispering my name through the thick, stale air of the building. I felt the building itself breathing around me, its walls alive with secrets no one dared to speak aloud. That night, sleep eluded me. The silence was different, thicker, expectant. At 2:13 a.m., the familiar scraping began. But this time it was joined by something else. A soft, almost inaudible whispering, like voices caught in a slow, mournful chant. I strained to listen, heart tight in my chest. Was it words? Names? Or a curse woven into the night? Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the apartment, despite closed windows and sealed doors. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling an invisible hand brush my skin. Then, the lights flickered. Faint shadows danced across the walls, shapes shifting just beyond the corner of my eye. When I dared to look directly, nothing was there. My breath came in ragged gasps. Was this madness? Or was I finally awake to the building's true nature? That night, seeking a reprieve from the growing heaviness that clung to the apartment like a suffocating shroud, I invited Paulo, a colleague from my new job, to join me for dinner. His presence, casual and grounded, seemed to break the oppressive spell that had been tightening around me over the past days. We ate, drank beer, and watched a football match, normalcy itself, an anchor tethering me back to the realm of the living. When Paulo left around 11, I felt a brief rush of relief, even embarrassment at how close I had come to surrendering to fear. I settled onto the couch, the television murmuring quietly in the background as sleep began to coax me toward its fragile embrace. But then, something woke me. A subtle, rhythmic tapping, water droplets falling onto the floor in a slow, steady beat. Drip. 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 I opened my eyes to find my ceiling weeping. Thin trails of water seeped through the plaster, gathering into a dark, ominous stain directly above me. My gaze locked on the growing blotch, frozen in horror as the droplets multiplied, from sparse to a relentless cascade. A narrow stream began to pour down, cool at first, then warm, splashing against my chest. The ceiling creaked, groaned, and sagged, bowing beneath a pressure it was never meant to bear. The plaster bulged downward, spiderweb cracks radiating outward, delicate and threatening. Panic finally broke the paralysis as I scrambled backward, heart hammering, limbs springing into terrified action. But the water was no longer clear. It darkened, thickened. Particles of plaster floated within the liquid, tangled with long, black strands that clung to the puddle growing on my floor like threads of some dreadful tapestry. The television flickered violently, the late-night program replaced by static, a cold, flickering blue glow washing over the room. In that eerie light, the ceiling bulged lower still, and I saw something pressing against the fragile barrier, a shape, a presence, immense and unseen. I fled to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me and wedging a chair beneath the handle. Through the wood, I heard the sickening crack of the living room ceiling finally giving way. The splash that followed was heavy, substantial, far more than water alone. Then came the footsteps. Slow, wet, and squelching across the living room floor. Dark water seeped beneath my bedroom door, soaking into the carpet, viscous, thick, unmistakably tainted. And then the smell hit me. Not the familiar mustiness of dampness, but something far more revolting, the coppery tang of blood, mixed with the sickly sweetness of advanced decay. The knocking began again. That same wet, fleshy sound, soft but deliberate, pressing against my door. This time, it was patient, unhurried, as if whatever waited beyond was infinite in its resolve. The door handle turned, stalling against the lock. The chair scraped forward with each push from the other side. I backed slowly against the far wall, clutching my phone in trembling hands. I dialed emergency services, but the call would not connect. No signal, though my screen stubbornly displayed full bars. The handle turned back and forth, clicking softly. A voice spoke from beyond the door, not aloud, but inside my mind. It whispered my name with a terrible intimacy, as though it had known me across 1,000 lifetimes. It said it had been waiting, that I had finally arrived, that we shared unfinished business. Business from before. Before what, I could not say. I had never set foot in Curitiba before my transfer. I had never known anyone who lived in this building. Yet the voice spoke as though we were bound by a history older than memory. As dawn broke, I found myself huddled in the corner of my bedroom, eyes fixed on the door that had somehow held fast all night. The living room told a different story. No sign of collapsed ceiling. No water stains, no debris. The plaster was pristine, unblemished. Shaken, I packed a bag with trembling hands and checked into a nearby hotel. When I called building management to terminate my lease, the woman on the phone sounded oddly unsurprised. She didn't ask why. Only confirmed my unit number and processed my request with cold, mechanical efficiency. 2 weeks later, I returned once, to gather what little I had left behind. Returning to the apartment felt like stepping through a veil between worlds. The familiar creaks and groans of Edificio Paraiso greeted me like old ghosts, whispering secrets in the stale air. The lobby was empty and cold, its dim light barely chasing back the shadows clinging to every corner. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the silence, the weight of anticipation pressing heavy on my chest. At the door to apartment 703, my former refuge, my prison, I paused. The lock clicked open easily, almost too easily. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. Yet something else lingered. An undercurrent of sorrow and anger, barely contained. I moved cautiously through the rooms, eyes scanning for signs, for remnants of the nightmarish visitation. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and somewhere, deep inside the walls, I thought I heard whispering, soft, desperate. Then I saw it. A single black strand of hair caught on the edge of the living room doorway, glistening dark against the faded carpet. My breath hitched. The past had followed me here, and it was not done with me yet. Marcos helped me pack my things, his face carefully neutral, yet his eyes betrayed a weight that words could not carry. As we finished, he hesitated at the door, turning back with a voice barely above a whisper. "You heard them too, didn't you?" he asked, the question hanging heavy between us, the footsteps, the water running, the haunting presence no one spoke of openly. I nodded, my throat too dry to respond. "They say she was in that bathtub for 3 days before anyone found her," he continued, eyes fixed on the floor. "The water running the whole time." He stopped himself then, tracing a furtive sign of the cross in the air, an unspoken plea or ward against the unseen. "They say she's still looking for someone. Someone who was supposed to meet her that night, but never came. I never discovered who had lived in apartment 703 before me. The management company claimed their records had been lost in some long-forgotten system update. Online searches yielded nothing, just empty silence. But sometimes, in the fragile moments between wakefulness and sleep, I still hear them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, waterlogged, approaching. And I feel, with a terrible certainty, that our unfinished business remains exactly that, unfinished. Since then, I've moved 4 times, different cities, different states. But it doesn't matter. The footsteps always find me eventually. And the water. Always the water. Even now, as I write this, I can hear it, the soft, persistent dripping from my bathroom. The shower I know I turned off hours ago. It's getting louder. Story 2. The first whisper came like a breath against the back of my neck, so faint I wasn't sure if it was just the wind slipping through a microscopic crack in the cabin's weathered frame. But there was something about it, something in the way it curled around my ear, that made my skin tighten and the hair on my arm rise in silent alarm. I froze, coffee mug suspended halfway to my lips, and listened. Nothing but the gentle crackle of the fireplace and the distant percussion of rain against the roof. I dismissed it, chalking it up to isolation playing tricks on my mind. 3 days alone in a remote cabin in Serra de Montecara will do that to you. I didn't know then that the silence was only the prelude to the horror yet to come. I had come to the mountains seeking solitude. My life in Sao Paulo had become a suffocating tangle of deadlines, traffic, and endless human interaction. When a colleague mentioned his family's cabin nestled high in the misty peaks of Monte Carlo, I jumped at the chance. 3 days completely off-grid, no cell service, no internet. Just me, a stack of books, and the ancient forest breathing all around. The perfect reset. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, a sturdy A-frame structure with a stone fireplace, worn leather furniture, and windows that framed the sprawling valley below. I arrived Friday afternoon as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky with violent streaks of orange and purple. After unpacking and lighting the fire, I settled in for what I hoped would be a weekend of peaceful contemplation. The first night passed quietly. I read by the fire's glow, sipping whiskey, listening to the symphony of the forest, the hollow calls of night birds, the rhythmic chirping of insects, the occasional rustle of underbrush as nocturnal creatures went about their business. I slept deeply, lulled by mountain air and absolute darkness. But on the second day, I first sensed that something was wrong. I spent the morning hiking a nearby trail, then returned to the cabin as thick clouds gathered, promising rain. I prepared lunch, speaking aloud to myself, a habit that had intensified since my self-imposed exile from social media. The sound of my own voice brought comfort, even if it was only my own. Around 3, the rain began, first a gentle patter, then a relentless mountain deluge. The rain hammered against the cabin windows, a relentless percussion that seemed to drown out every other sound in the world. I sat close to the fireplace, watching the flames flicker and dance, their warm light a fragile barrier against the growing darkness outside and within. That's when the whisper returned. This time it was not just a breath but a murmur, winding itself through the crackling fire and the roaring storm. Words indistinct yet beckoning, an echo of voices long forgotten, curling softly around my mind. I told myself it was the wind playing tricks, the loneliness making meaning from noise. But deep down, a seed of fear took root. Night fell heavy and silent. Sleep was elusive, each shadow stretching long and twisting strange in the flickering firelight. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer, its ancient trees whispering secrets on the wind. Then, in the depths of night, came the sound that shattered what little calm remained. A slow, deliberate tapping on the cabin door. Not frantic or urgent, but patient, as if whatever waited outside had all the time in the world. Heart pounding, I rose to the door. But the moment my hand touched the wood, the tapping stopped. Silence swallowed the night once more. Morning came with gray light filtering through rain-streaked windows. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered like a shadow clinging to my skin. When I stepped outside, the forest floor was a tapestry of water and fallen leaves, but among them, a single footprint. Not human. Elongated and oddly shaped, the print vanished into the underbrush like a whisper lost to the wind. I shivered, knowing that the solitude I sought had been broken by something old, something patient, something waiting. Days passed with an uneasy rhythm, each morning a reluctant return to the tangible world, each night a descent into restless shadows. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere thickened, as if the very air held its breath. Objects seemed to shift subtly when I wasn't looking, a misplaced book, a chair nudged slightly out of place. Whispers drifted at the edge of hearing, just beyond clear comprehension. One night, unable to bear the mounting tension, I sat by the fireplace long after the flames had died. The silence pressed against me like a living thing. Then came the tapping again. Soft, deliberate, this time from inside the cabin. The door to the bedroom. My heart thundered. I told myself it was nothing. Just the house settling. But the handle began to turn slowly. I bolted upright, breath caught. Locked as always, but the handle inched downward, as if pulled by an unseen hand. A voice seeped into my mind, intimate and cold. It called my name. Whispered promises of truth and reckoning. Promises I couldn't understand yet felt drawn toward like a moth to a flame. Frozen, I could do nothing but watch as the chair beneath the handle creaked and slipped. Until, finally, the handle stopped. And silence swallowed the room once more. I had built up the fire, its warm glow licking the edges of the dim room, and settled onto the couch with a novel in hand. The words on the page blurred as my mind lingered uneasily on the faint murmur I'd heard earlier, something just beyond the threshold of hearing. I glanced up at the cabin's wooden ceiling. Its steep A-frame construction meant a small attic space lurked above, accessible only by a pull-down ladder tucked discreetly in the back hallway. My colleague had told me it was used for storage, nothing I would need during my stay. I returned to my book, willing the sound to be nothing more than rainwater tracing the beams, the wind playing its familiar tricks through the eaves. But then it came again. More distinct this time. Not the random patter of raindrops or the errant howl of wind. Something with rhythm. A cadence. Something almost like words. My pulse quickened. I set my book down carefully, tilting my head, trying to locate the source. Definitely from above. Definitely not just the storm. Then I heard it clearly. Check the firewood supply. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The words weren't similar to something I'd said before, they were identical. Delivered in a whispered approximation of my own voice. I stood frozen. Breathing shallow and rapid. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill that had gripped my body. I fought to be rational. Perhaps it was an echo, a bizarre acoustic phenomenon caused by the cabin's peculiar construction. Or maybe exhaustion was conjuring ghosts in my mind. Voices shaped by my own fears. I spoke aloud, voice trembling. It's just the wind. I counted my heartbeats as they hammered in my chest. 1, 2, 3, 20, 30. A minute passed. Silence. My breathing began to slow. I laughed nervously, mocking my own superstition. Of course it was just the wind. Or branches scraping the roof. Or, it's just the wind, whispered the voice again, from above. 3 hours later, as I washed the dinner dishes, my hands clutched the edge of the sink until my knuckles whitened. The plate I held slipped and clattered against the metal basin. No mistaking it this time. The same intonation. The same cadence. My own words returned to me, a hushed, sibilant echo of my voice. I dried my hands on a dish towel, leaving damp fingerprints in the fabric. My mouth was dry. My pulse thundered, not just in my temples but in my wrists, in my throat. Something was in the attic. Something was listening. And now, it was speaking back. Rational explanations slipped away as quickly as I summoned them. I hadn't told a soul about the attic. Hadn't spoken aloud about checking it. No one could have known. Yet here were my own casual phrases whispered back, hours after I'd spoken them. I found myself moving toward the hallway where the attic access was tucked away. My feet obeyed without asking. A trapdoor set into the ceiling, a thin cord dangling like a noose. My hand trembled visibly as I reached up and pulled. The ladder descended smoothly. No creak, no protest. Had someone been up there recently? I stood at the base, staring into the yawning blackness. Not into a storage space, but into a mouth opening wide. I stepped back. Focused on steadying my breathing. I needed light. Found a battery-powered lantern in a kitchen drawer and returned to the hallway. The attic opening still gaped, black and expectant. I placed a foot on the first rung. "Hello," I called, immediately regretting my words. Silence answered. I climbed another rung. The wood groaned under my weight, sound sharp and unnatural in the stillness. Another step. Another. I raised the lantern. Trying to pierce the darkness above. The lantern's weak beam trembled as I raised it higher, struggling to carve a path through the suffocating black above. The air grew colder, thickening with a heaviness that pressed against my lungs. Step by step, I climbed, the ladder's creaks echoing like whispered warnings. Halfway up, the beam caught something, a flicker of movement, a shadow slipping just beyond the light's reach. I froze. The silence deepened, broken only by the rhythm of my own breath and the distant patter of rain against the roof. The attic stretched out before me, a cavern of forgotten things and secrets kept too long. Boxes draped in dusty tarps, broken furniture, brittle papers curled with age. But beneath it all, something else pulsed, a quiet heartbeat in the dark. A whisper skittered at the edge of hearing. Words, just beyond comprehension. I took another step, heart hammering, drawn toward the invisible thread pulling me deeper. And then, a voice, clear and cold. "Welcome home." The attic was empty, or at least empty of anything unusual. A few sealed cardboard boxes, an old steamer trunk, exposed rafters and insulation. I hoisted myself up, sweeping the lantern's trembling beam across the confined space. Nothing to explain the whispers. No hidden speakers. No sign of habitation. No openings where someone might have entered from outside. A mix of relief and deeper unease washed over me. If nothing was here, then what had I heard? I lowered myself back down the ladder and returned to the main room, leaving the attic access open. If something was up there, I wanted to hear it coming. The rest of the evening passed in a tense silence, broken only by the crackle of dying embers. I avoided speaking aloud, even as the oppressive isolation pressed down on me like a physical weight. I kept the lantern close, its small circle of light a fragile barrier against shadows that seemed to gather and deepen in the corners. At some point, exhaustion conquered fear. I fell into a fitful sleep on the couch, unwilling to retreat to the bedroom where I'd be farther from the exit. I awoke to pre-dawn grayness and a chilling sensation, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. My skin prickled as though unseen eyes surrounded me, pressing in from every direction at once. Slowly, I sat up, muscles stiff from my awkward slumber. The fire had dwindled to cold embers, and the cabin was cold. But that wasn't what made the shivers cascade down my spine. Written in condensation on the window beside the couch were words. My words. Phrases I had uttered aloud during my solitary conversations over the past 2 days. Perfect reset. Impending storm. Comfort in the sound of a human voice. The handwriting was not mine. Each letter formed with meticulous precision, identical to the next, as if printed rather than written. I lunged from the couch, nearly toppling the coffee table in my haste. My heart pounded violently, throbbing in my fingertips and ringing in my ears. I grabbed my phone. No service, as expected, but the flashlight still worked. Approaching the window, I forced myself to examine the writing more closely. The condensation was on the inside of the glass. Whatever had written these words had been in the room with me while I slept. A sound escaped me, somewhere between a gasp and a moan. I spun around, sweeping the phone's light over the room. Nothing appeared disturbed. Nothing seemed different. Except the attic ladder. Now retracted. The trap door closed, as if it had never been opened. Stumbling to the front door, I twisted the deadbolt with trembling hands and flung it open. The mountain air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, redolent with pine and wet earth. Dawn was breaking. The forest transformed from black silhouettes into distinct shapes. I stood in the doorway, 1 foot on the threshold, torn between fleeing into the wild woods and the fear of what might await me out there. My rational mind mounted one last desperate defense. Perhaps I was unraveling. Stress-induced hallucinations. Maybe a gas leak, carbon monoxide poisoning, was slowly stealing my sanity. Any explanation seemed preferable to accepting the terrifying truth. That something was in this cabin with me. Something that collected my words, twisted them, and returned them in whispers and writing. I forced myself to close the door. If this was a psychological episode, fleeing half-dressed into the wilderness would only invite physical peril. Better to gather my things calmly and drive back to civilization. Seek help if necessary. As I moved to the bedroom to pack, eyes darting nervously toward ceiling, windows, and corners, a new sound stopped me cold. Not whispers this time. But slow, deliberate scratching. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Directly above me. From the ceiling. His scratching persisted, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Each sound reverberated through the thin wooden ceiling, a sinister metronome marking the passage of my rising dread. I froze, every nerve taut and trembling. The lantern's light trembled in my hand as I raised it, searching the ceiling for any sign of movement or disturbance. Nothing. Just the dull, aged planks above me, silently bearing witness to whatever unseen force played its cruel game. I swallowed hard, willing myself to breathe, to move. But my body was caught in a web of terror and disbelief. The scratching continued, now accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible whispering, words too soft to discern, yet unmistakably there. The hair on my arms stood on end as the shadows in the room seemed to deepen and gather closer, pressing against the fragile barrier of light. I edged toward the door, every sound magnified in the oppressive silence. The thought of escaping flitted through my mind like a desperate hope. But before I could reach for the handle, the scratching stopped. An unbearable silence fell, thick and suffocating. And then, a single, slow knock on the bedroom door. The scratching above was not just noise. It was deliberate, like something dragged across the wooden boards, or like someone writing. I abandoned my packing, neck craned upward, tracing the sound as it traveled slowly across the ceiling. It stopped directly above the center of the room. Then came a sound I can only describe as a sigh. A long, mournful exhalation that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. What followed was worse than any whisper, any writing on glass. In the stillness of the cabin, I heard my own voice. Not whispered. Not distant. But played back with perfect clarity, as if from a recording. Every word I had spoken aloud since arriving. A chronological replay, my mundane observations, one-sided conversations, the sound of my breathing as I slept. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice seeped through my fingers like liquid, cold and unyielding. The playback reached the previous night, the moment I had stood beneath the attic opening. "Hello," my voice called out from above. Then something new emerged. Not my voice anymore, but something mimicking my vocal patterns and inflections. Forming words I had never spoken. "I've been collecting you, word by word, breath by breath. Tomorrow, I will be you." I didn't pack. I didn't change out of my sleep clothes. I grabbed my car keys and phone and fled the cabin. The door slammed behind me with a finality that echoed through the dense trees. Fumbling with the car lock, I glanced back at the cabin. In the growing dawn light, I saw something in the small attic window. A silhouette. Person-shaped, but somehow wrong. Like a reflection in troubled water. I drove down the mountain road at dangerous speeds. The car fishtailed on wet gravel, every moment a battle to keep control. Only when I reached the main highway, when civilization appeared in the form of a gas station with scattered early morning customers, did I allow myself to pull over. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice, struggling to remove them from the ignition. I never returned to that cabin. Though eventually, I retrieved my belongings. My colleague was confused but accommodating when I claimed a family emergency had forced my abrupt departure. He sent someone to clean and secure the property. The cleaner reported nothing unusual, except a few phrases written on the bathroom mirror. Words my colleague recognized as his own, spoken during his last stay months earlier. Sometimes, late at night, in my city apartment surrounded by the comforting noise of traffic and neighbors, I wake to whispers coming through the vents. Words I spoke earlier that day, returned in the dark. Sometimes, though I live alone, I find phrases written in steam on my bathroom mirror after a shower. Words in my exact handwriting, words I have no memory of writing. I've stopped speaking aloud to myself. I've covered every mirror in my apartment. But deep down, I know these precautions are futile. Whatever was in that cabin didn't need the attic to collect me. It's been collecting all of us, word by word, breath by breath, waiting for its moment to become us completely. And the worst part? I think it's been doing this long before any of us noticed. I think it's already become many of us. I think it's already here. Story 3, The Mirror's Whisper. The first time I noticed something wrong with the mirror was 3 days after moving in. Not immediately. That would have been a mercy. Instead, the strangeness crept in gradually, allowing me to question my own perception before I could be certain of what I was seeing. By then, it was already too late. The Victorian townhouse on Blackwood Lane was exactly what I needed after my divorce. Affordable, secluded, and with enough restoration work to keep my mind occupied. The real estate agent had been suspiciously eager to close the deal. Rushing through paperwork, glossing over the property's history with practiced deflections. The Victorian townhouse on Blackwood Lane stood like a relic from another time, its weathered brickwork crowned with ivy, windows dark and watching like eyes. It promised solitude and a fresh start, a refuge from the tangled pain of my recent divorce. But from the moment I crossed its threshold, an uneasy silence clung to the air, a quiet too heavy to be mere stillness. The real estate agent had been eager to close the deal, her smile too quick, her answers too vague when I asked about the house's past. "Nothing to worry about," she said, voice light but eyes fleeting. "Just an old place with character." I soon learned what she meant. The first oddity was the mirror in the main hallway, an ornate, full-length glass framed in dark, carved wood. It caught my eye one afternoon when the afternoon light hit just so, reflecting not quite what was behind me. At first, it was subtle, a glance out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement that didn't match the room. Then, the reflections began to warp, elongate, and shift when I wasn't looking directly. Sometimes, the mirror showed a figure standing just behind me, a shadowy presence that vanished when I turned. At night, the mirror seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the surface rippling faintly like disturbed water. 3 days after moving in, I first heard it. A whisper, so soft I thought it was my imagination. But it grew clearer, forming words in a voice that was both familiar and alien. Look closer. Remember. The mirror's surface seemed to pulse with a pale light, beckoning me forward. I tried to turn away, but found myself rooted to the spot. The reflection no longer showed my room, but scenes from a time long past, shadows moving through the house's rooms, faces blurred and indistinct, and whispers curling through the glass like smoke. I began to question my own mind. Was I losing grip on reality? Or was the mirror a window to something darker, a place where memories and shadows intertwined? Each night, the reflections grew more vivid. The whispers more insistent. And I knew, deep down, that the house held secrets, secrets waiting to be uncovered, or perhaps better left alone. I didn't press the issue. At 38, with half my possessions gone and a freshly signed settlement agreement in hand, I was more concerned with moving forward than dwelling on whatever ghosts might inhabit my new address. The previous owner, neighbors said, had been a reclusive older man who vanished one night without explanation, leaving behind most of his belongings. The agent assured me those would be cleared before I moved in. But when I arrived, dragging my meager collection of boxes, I found several rooms still cluttered with forgotten things. The attic, in particular, remained untouched. I spent the first 2 days cleaning the main living spaces, scrubbing decades of neglect and arranging my few remaining possessions in a feeble attempt to make the echoing rooms feel inhabited. On the third day, I tackled the attic. The narrow staircase groaned beneath my weight, each step releasing small clouds of dust that danced in thin beams of light from a small round window. The air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of old paper and wood rot. As I reached the top, I felt a peculiar resistance, like the air itself thickened, pushing back against my intrusion. The attic stretched the length of the house, low-ceilinged and crammed with forgotten treasures and worthless junk alike. Cardboard boxes sagged under the weight of old books. Trunks overflowed with yellowed clothing. And against the far wall, partially covered by a faded sheet, stood an ornate floor mirror. I approached slowly, stepping carefully around scattered obstacles. The sheet came away easily, releasing a cloud of dust that made me cough and turn away for a moment. When I looked back, I found myself staring at my own reflection in an oval mirror framed in dark wood carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift subtly in the dim light. The glass itself was flawless, unusual for an antique piece. No bubbles, no discoloration, just a perfect silvery surface reflecting the attic with unsettling clarity. I stood before it, studying my own face, thinner now, lines around my eyes and mouth I hadn't noticed before the divorce. I raised my hand to touch the stubble on my jaw. That's when I noticed it. A delay, barely perceptible, perhaps a quarter of a second, but my reflection's hand moved after mine, like an actor missing a cue. I frowned. My reflection frowned, too, but slightly too late. I told myself it was a trick of the light, fatigue from the move. I covered the mirror again and continued sorting through the attic's contents. But throughout the day, my thoughts kept returning to that slight delay, the tiny desynchronization between my movements and their reflection. That night, I dreamed of the mirror. In my dream, I stood before it again, but my reflection wore an expression I couldn't feel on my own face. A slight smile, knowing, secretive. I woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering. The next morning, I returned to the attic. I don't know why, curiosity, perhaps, or a stubborn unwillingness to be unsettled by an inanimate object. I uncovered the mirror again and stood before it. This time, the delay was more pronounced. When I raised my hand, my reflection waited a full second before mimicking the gesture. When I stepped back in surprise, my reflection remained still for a moment before following. I convinced myself it was a strange optical illusion, something about the mirror's age or construction. I decided to move it downstairs to my bedroom, partly to examine it in better light, partly as a challenge to my growing unease. It was heavier than it looked and awkward to maneuver down the narrow attic stairs. But I managed to install it in the corner of my bedroom. Under the bright light of my bedside lamp, the mirror looked less mystical, more simply antique. The mirror sat quietly in the corner of my bedroom, its dark wood frame casting long shadows across the floor as the bedside lamp flickered softly. In the harsh light, it appeared less mystical, just an antique relic, beautiful but inert. Yet, beneath its polished surface, something pulsed, an unspoken presence, watching, waiting. The first night, I caught it again, the subtle delay between my movements and the reflections. My hand would rise, and the reflections followed, just a heartbeat too late. Sometimes, the reflection lingered a moment longer after I moved away, as if reluctant to let go. Sleep became uneasy. Dreams twisted around the mirror's image, visions of faces blurred and shifting, voices whispering just beyond comprehension. I found myself talking less aloud, afraid of what the mirror might capture next. One evening, as the room darkened, I noticed something else. The reflection didn't always match my expression. A fleeting smirk, a narrowed eye, glimpses of emotion I didn't feel. The mirror seemed alive, an echo of something not quite me. My days blurred with restless nights. I caught myself hesitating before the mirror, reluctant to meet those delayed eyes. The boundary between reflection and reality thinned, and I felt pulled toward that silent world behind the glass. I began performing a series of movements in front of the mirror, raising and lowering my arms, turning my head, stepping side to side. Sometimes, my reflection followed perfectly in sync. Other times, the delay returned, growing longer, more pronounced. Compelled to make sense of this impossible phenomenon, I began keeping a journal, meticulously documenting the mirror's behavior. Part of me knew how absurd it was, treating an object as if it had agency, but I needed proof I wasn't imagining things. Each day, the discrepancies grew more pronounced. By the end of the first week, my reflection lagged behind by several seconds. By mid-second week, it began to deviate entirely. I'd raise my right hand, but my reflection raised its left. I'd step forward, it would remain perfectly still. Most disturbing of all was when I stood motionless before the glass, my face carefully blank. My reflection would slowly curl its lips into a smile I was not making. Sleep became a battleground. I woke repeatedly, certain I was being watched. Several times, I jerked awake to see my reflection sitting upright in the mirrored bed, while I lay down, its eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that chilled me to the bone. I began covering the mirror with a sheet before sleeping. But each morning, I found the sheet crumpled on the floor, the mirror uncovered, though I was sure I hadn't touched it. My colleagues at the architectural firm noticed the change. During a meeting about a new project, my supervisor asked if I was all right. I looked exhausted, he said. My hands trembled as I assured him I was fine, just adjusting to the new house. He suggested taking time off. I declined. The thought of spending more time alone with that mirror filled me with a dread I couldn't articulate. I considered disposing of it, but an odd compulsion held me back. A need to understand. Instead, I began researching the house's history and its previous owners. The local historical society provided little beyond the house's construction date and a list of owners. The man before me, Malcolm Harrow, had bought the house 15 years ago, vanished without explanation 3 months earlier. Before him, the house stood empty for nearly a decade after a young couple's sudden departure. Their names were unrecorded, but the volunteer noted there had been an incident, though she claimed ignorance of details. At the town library, I sifted through newspaper archives. No mention of Malcolm Harrow's disappearance, a strange omission for a small town. But I found a brief article from 25 years prior about the young couple, admitted to a psychiatric facility after what was described vaguely as shared delusions of persecution. No further details. That night, I returned home late from the library. The house was dark and unnervingly cold, despite the mild spring evening. As I moved through the rooms, turning on lights, a heaviness pressed down, a presence that seemed to trail me. When I reached my bedroom door, I hesitated for minutes, unable to enter. Finally, mustering courage, I pushed it open. The mirror stood in the corner, reflecting the dark room. But then I noticed something chilling. A shadow moved in the glass, without counterpart in the room. My reflection was absent, though I stood directly in its line of sight. I stepped back, breath shallow and fast. The shadow approached the glass from the other side, roughly human-shaped, but wrong. Proportions slightly askew. Movements too fluid, too unnatural. The shadow pressed against the glass, its form shifting and distorting with an unnatural fluidity. It reached out a hand, too long, fingers curling in a way that no human hand should. I wanted to look away, to shut the door and flee, but my feet were rooted. The air grew colder, the weight of unseen eyes bearing down on me. The shadow's mouth twisted into a cruel smile, one I did not recognize, but that felt intimately threatening. Suddenly, the glass rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. And then, impossibly, the shadow stepped forward. Not through the mirror, but into it. It moved closer, its eyes locking with mine. A voice echoed inside my mind, a whisper both foreign and achingly familiar. "You are mine now." I staggered back, heart pounding, as the room darkened and the mirror's surface shimmered ominously. I knew, in that moment, that whatever haunted this house was no longer confined to reflections. It had crossed the threshold, and it was waiting for me. As the shadow drew closer to the surface of the mirror, its features began to crystallize, a face hauntingly familiar, yet wrong, like a sculpture carved by someone who had only heard whispers of my appearance. I stumbled backward, breath caught, heart pounding. That night, I retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind me. But even there, the mirror's presence lingered, a subtle, unyielding pressure at the edge of my awareness. When sleep finally came, my dreams were corridors lined with endless mirrors, my reflection chasing me. Always one step behind, until suddenly, it wasn't behind at all, but waiting ahead, a silent sentinel. The next morning, I called in sick. I had to deal with the mirror. This time, I resolved to remove it from the house. Cautiously, I entered my bedroom. The mirror looked ordinary again, reflecting the room without distortion. Relief flooded me, swiftly replaced by doubt. Had it all been imagined? Was my mind fracturing? I stepped closer, studying the reflection. It moved in perfect synchrony with me. I raised my hand, it mirrored the motion. I frowned, it frowned. Experimentally, I smiled. For a long moment, the reflection remained solemn, then its lips curved into a smile that stretched too wide, revealing too many teeth. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My reflection remained still, smiling that impossible smile. Slowly, deliberately, it raised its hand and pressed the palm against the glass, from the other side. The surface rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Then, impossibly, the glass yielded. Fingers slipped through, pale and too smooth, like wax. A wrist, an arm, then, nothing more. I fled. Downstairs, out the door, onto the street. Gasping, eyes wide, heart racing. A neighbor called out, concerned. I nodded, though I looked anything but okay. Eventually, I forced myself back inside. Room by room, silent and alert. At the bedroom door, I paused, then opened it slowly. The mirror was as it had always been. My reflection moved with me, perfectly synchronized. But then I noticed a faint handprint on the glass, smudged, as if someone had pressed their palm from the other side. That afternoon, I packed a bag and checked into a motel on the edge of town. I told myself I needed distance, perspective. To decide if this was supernatural or the mind unraveling under stress. 3 days in a plain motel room, with only a small bathroom mirror, helped clear my head. I rationalized it: divorce stress, anxiety, maybe a condition worsened by poor air quality. When I returned home, the mirror stood innocuous in the afternoon light. I watched as my reflection perfectly mimicked my movements. Relief and embarrassment mingled. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. I woke briefly, hearing movement. But nothing was there. In the morning, dressing, I noticed a small bruise on my forearm. I didn't remember how it got there. The bruise on my forearm was small and dark, an angry purple that seemed to pulse beneath my skin. I stared at it, searching my memory for any hint of injury. There was nothing. No bump, no scrape, no explanation. A chill ran down my spine. Days passed, and the mirror's presence shifted from subtle to insistent. I caught glimpses out of the corner of my eye, movement that shouldn't have been there. Sometimes, the reflection lingered longer than I did. Sometimes, it blinked when I hadn't. One evening, as I stood before the mirror, the room around me seemed to dim. The glass fogged over, then cleared to reveal not my bedroom, but a different room, dimly lit, with walls covered in faded wallpaper and furniture draped in white sheets. A figure stood in the center, back to me. Slowly, it turned. Its face was obscured, but I felt its gaze. Cold. Unyielding. I reached out instinctively, but the glass remained smooth and unyielding beneath my fingertips. A voice, faint and echoing, whispered in my mind. "You cannot escape." Panic surged. I stepped back, heart racing. The mirror's surface rippled, and for a fleeting moment, I saw my own face, twisted in terror, trapped behind the glass. That night, sleep fled me. The house felt alive with whispers and shadows. And I knew the mirror was waiting. Waiting to claim me. Driven by desperation, I returned to the town's archives, the fragile pages of old records and faded photographs whispering secrets long buried. The mirror, I learned, was once part of an estate belonging to Eleanor Wren, a woman whose name haunted local folklore like a shadow without a form. Eleanor was known as a recluse, a woman of remarkable beauty and sharp intellect, yet shrouded in tragedy. Rumors whispered she dabbled in the occult, seeking to bind her soul to eternity through arcane rituals. She was said to have commissioned the mirror from a master craftsman known for his uncanny creations, mirrors that did not merely reflect, but capture. Captured more than images, but fragments of spirit and memory. The townsfolk's fear grew as Eleanor's behavior changed. She became obsessed with the mirror, spending hours gazing into its depths, conversing with the shadows it held. Neighbors spoke of strange lights flickering in her windows and mournful cries echoing through the night. One autumn evening, Eleanor vanished without a trace. Her home was found abandoned, save for the mirror, standing pristine and silent, reflecting an empty room. No evidence explained her disappearance. Over decades, the mirror passed through owners who reported nightmares, hallucinations, and eerie reflections that moved on their own. Some fled in terror, others were found dead under mysterious circumstances. The house itself gained a reputation, a place where reality frayed, where the mirror's reach seeped into the lives of those who dared possess it. As I closed the brittle pages, a cold realization gripped me. The mirror was no mere antique. It was a vessel. A prison. A predator. And now, it had set its sights on me. From the moment I uncovered Eleanor's story, the air in my home grew heavier, laden with a presence that pulsed just beyond the edge of perception. Each glance at the mirror stirred an uneasy shiver, as if the glass held not only reflections but memories aching to break free. The mirror began to change. Its surface no longer static, but alive, rippling faintly like the surface of a disturbed pond. Shadows pooled within its depths, swirling in patterns that seemed both ancient and intent. My reflection was no longer mine alone. At times, it split, fracturing into fragments that whispered secrets I could not understand. Other times, it blurred and shifted, as if the glass served as a portal, teasing me with glimpses of Eleanor's restless soul trapped within. Sleep became a distant memory. I awoke in cold sweats, haunted by dreams where the mirror's surface cracked open like a wound, and a hand, pale, spectral, reached out to claim me. One night, I stood before the mirror, heart pounding, determination burning through my fear. I spoke aloud, demanding answers, pleading for release from its silent torment. The room grew cold. The glass fogged, then cleared to reveal Eleanor herself, her eyes hollow, her expression a blend of sorrow and malice. "You are mine now," she whispered, voice like a breeze through dead leaves. The mirror vibrated, and I felt its pull, an irresistible force dragging me closer to the glass. I stumbled back, breath ragged, the weight of her gaze pressing down like chains. The mirror's grip was tightening. I was no longer a visitor in my own home. I was its captive. Days blurred into nights, and my world became consumed by the mirror's relentless pull. The boundary between reflection and reality frayed, my own movements felt sluggish, as if tethered to a shadowy double. Every glance at the mirror sent shivers down my spine. I could feel Eleanor's presence, a specter of sorrow and wrath, clawing at the edges of my mind. Determined to reclaim my life, I sought answers beyond the town's archives. I found an old journal buried in the Historical Society's collection, penned by a descendant of the mirror's original craftsman. The journal spoke of a ritual, a binding spell meant to trap restless souls within the mirror's depths. But it warned of a terrible price. The mirror claimed the soul of any who tried to break its hold, consuming their essence to fuel its dark power. The only hope lay in a counter-ritual, fraught with risk and requiring a sacrifice of equal weight. Armed with fragments of forgotten knowledge, I prepared to face the mirror once more. I gathered salt, candles, and herbs, tools of protection and banishment. As night fell, I lit the candles, their flickering flames casting trembling shadows on the walls. Standing before the mirror, I spoke the incantation, voice steady despite the storm of fear inside me. The mirror pulsed, Eleanor's visage emerging, twisted in rage. She screamed, a soundless wail that rattled my bones. The glass cracked, spiderweb fractures spreading across the surface. I felt a searing pain, as if invisible hands clawed at my soul. But I held firm. And then, the mirror shattered. Glass exploded in a shower of shards, the oppressive presence vanishing in an instant. Silence. Freedom. Or so I thought. The shattered glass lay scattered like fragments of a broken soul across the cold wooden floor. The suffocating weight that had clung to the house vanished, leaving an eerie, fragile quiet in its wake. For the first time in months, the air felt light, almost pure. I sank to my knees amid the shards, heart pounding, breath trembling with a tentative hope. But freedom exacts its price. That night, shadows crept differently. Not the shadows of the mirror, but deeper, older darkness. In my dreams, Eleanor appeared, not as a prisoner, but as a specter, freed yet wrathful. Her eyes burned with sorrow and vengeance. She whispered of debts unpaid, of bonds forged in blood and spirit that no mere glass could contain. In waking hours, the house shifted. Walls seemed to breathe, floors groaned beneath unseen feet. A cold wind whispered through closed windows. I realized then, the mirror was only the prison's door, not its walls. Breaking it had released something far worse. I was no longer its captive. But now, I was its target. The dark spell, shattered in glass, now hunted me. And the line between reality and nightmare blurred irrevocably. As I examined the bruise in the bathroom mirror, its shape became unmistakably clear, fingertips, as if someone had gripped me tightly. I looked up, eyes locking with my reflection's face. But behind me, in the glass, not in the room, stood something else. My reflection, yet not mine, watching with my own eyes. Frozen in horror, unable to breathe or move, I watched it smile slowly. Then it raised a finger to its lips, a silent, mocking hush. I still live in the house on Blackwood Lane. I've thought about moving, but something always stops me. The mirror remains in my bedroom, draped beneath a heavy black cloth. Yet sometimes, I find the cloth on the floor in the morning. Sometimes, I glimpse my reflection where there should be none, in windows, dark screens, puddles. I've stopped seeking my reflection in mirrors altogether, knowing what looks back isn't me anymore. A gnawing fear lives inside me, that one day I'll look into a mirror and see nothing. That I'll be trapped on the other side, pressing my palms helplessly against cold, unyielding glass. Forever lost in that inverted world, watching someone else live my life. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear tapping on glass. I never answer. I never will. But sometimes, I wonder if it's already too late, that the exchange has happened and I am the reflection now, trapped in a reversed world. Story 4, The Railway Yard Lights. The first time I saw the lights, I told myself they were reflections. Old railway yards play tricks on the eyes, especially during graveyard shifts when shadows stretch like hungry things across rusted tracks and abandoned cars. But reflections don't move with purpose. They don't pause at junctions, hover over specific sections, or vanish when approached. Most importantly, reflections don't watch you back. I've been the night watchman at Holloway Rail Yard for 4 months. It wasn't my first choice, or even my 10th, but in this economy, you take what you can get. 3 nights a week, I patrol the sprawling industrial graveyard of decommissioned train cars and crumbling warehouses on the town's outskirts. Security is minimal, mostly to deter vandals and metal thieves, and probably just insurance. The yard covers over 30 acres, twisted rails, forgotten machinery slowly reclaimed by nature. My supervisor, Jenkins, gave me a perfunctory tour on my first day, pointing out key buildings. "Don't bother with the south section," he said, nodding toward dilapidated structures hidden by overgrowth. "Nothing there but track 7 in the old warehouse. They're demolishing it next year anyway." When I asked about track 7, he shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Just old maintenance equipment. Unsafe. Keep to your route, and you'll be fine." His forced casualness left me with a nagging curiosity about that section. For the first month, I followed orders, but isolation wore on me. 12 hours alone in the dark, armed with a flashlight, radio, and coffee. The symphony of creaking metal, rustling wildlife, and distant traffic became my only company. I started taking longer routes, exploring abandoned offices and sheds not on the checklist. During my 5th week, I finally ventured toward the south section. My flashlight pierced the November fog as I navigated knee-high weeds and debris. The old warehouse loomed, a massive shadow against the night sky. The cold fog clung to the ground, swirling around my boots as I stepped closer to the old warehouse on the south side of the yard. The massive rectangular building loomed like a forgotten relic, its rusted metal walls streaked with years of neglect and creeping vines. My flashlight's beam caught glimpses of broken windows and peeling paint. The air smelled damp, tinged with the faint metallic scent of rust and decay. Silence reigned here, save for the occasional creak of shifting metal and the distant call of a night bird. I hesitated at the entrance, its heavy doors hanging slightly ajar as if inviting me in, or warning me to stay away. Inside, the warehouse was a cavernous space of shadows and silence. My footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as I moved deeper, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. Broken machinery lay scattered like discarded bones, and the air was thick with dust and the weight of forgotten years. Then, I noticed the tracks. Track 7. Unlike the others, these rails were strangely pristine, as if recently used or maintained. My heart quickened. As I followed the track deeper into the warehouse, the faintest glow appeared ahead, a cluster of flickering lights hovering above the rails. They moved with intent, stopping and starting, converging on certain points before vanishing without trace when I tried to approach. An unnatural stillness wrapped the space, pressing in on me. And then, from the shadows, a pair of eyes watched back. Cold. Unblinking. The warehouse's windows were like black holes, most of the glass long shattered and missing. Outside, the ground was a tangled maze of rusted tracks, switches, and long-abandoned signals, a transit network to nowhere. That's when I saw it. A faint yellowish glow drifting slowly between two rail cars about 100 yards ahead. My first thought was trespassers, maybe teenagers looking for trouble or homeless people seeking shelter. I radioed in my position out of protocol, but I didn't mention the light. Instead, I approached cautiously, flashlight trained on the spot. The light moved with a deliberate slowness, swaying like an old-fashioned lantern carried at hip height. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The glow cast no illumination on the surrounding ground or metal surfaces nearby. It was just there, a self-contained orb of amber light drifting silently along the tracks. Then, suddenly, it vanished. Not by fading or moving behind something, but simply winked out of existence the moment I got within 30 feet. I spent 20 minutes searching the area with my flashlight, expecting to find someone hiding. But there was nothing. No footprints in the soft earth. No disturbance in the thick layer of dust inside the nearest railcars. No signs of entry or exit. The temperature had dropped several degrees, and a cold prickle ran down the back of my neck. I told myself it was exhaustion playing tricks on me. Working nights messes with perception. Every security guard knows that. 2 nights later, I saw the lights again, 3 of them this time. They moved in perfect synchronization along track 7. Maintaining a consistent distance, about 10 feet apart, pacing steadily. I stood frozen, heart hammering. This time, I had my phone ready. I zoomed in on the glowing orbs. But the screen showed only darkness where the lights clearly danced before my eyes. I toggled video mode, recording for nearly a minute while narrating what I saw. The playback revealed only blackness, and my own increasingly agitated voice describing things unseen. My mouth went dry. My hands trembled as I pocketed the phone and watched until the lights disappeared into the warehouse. In the following weeks, sightings grew more frequent. Sometimes a single light. Other times, 7 or 8 moving in formation. They always stuck to the tracks, especially track 7, and vanished every time I tried to record them. I tried different cameras, angles, even borrowed night vision equipment. The result was always the same, the lights were visible only to me. I made discreet inquiries. Asked Jenkins about past incidents. His responses were evasive, vague, topic-changing, insisting the south section was off-limits due to structural concerns. When I pressed about track 7 specifically, a flicker of fear crossed his eyes. "Listen," he said in a low voice, "some places collect stories. This yard's been here since 1887. You think nothing ever happened here?" He wouldn't say more. The message was clear, leave it alone. But I couldn't. The mystery consumed me. It followed me home, filling my thoughts. I dove into researching the yard's history, local newspapers, railroad archives. What I found were fragments, stories deliberately obscured in official records. In 1923, 3 railway workers disappeared during the overnight shift. Their lanterns were found perfectly placed along track 7, still lit but abandoned. The year was 1923. 3 railway workers vanished without a trace during the night shift on track 7. Their lanterns were discovered the next morning, eerily positioned along the rails, still burning bright as if marking a path into oblivion. The official investigation concluded nothing, no evidence, no suspects, no answers. Just silence. Over the decades, rumors swirled. Stories told in hushed tones of strange lights flickering among the rails, of ghostly figures glimpsed between abandoned cars. Railwaymen spoke of an unseen watcher, a presence that haunted the yard after dark, a shadow lingering long after the trains had ceased their runs. Some claimed the workers had stumbled upon something forbidden, an ancient curse, a restless spirit bound to the rails. I uncovered mention of a local legend, the Rail Wraith. A specter said to be the spirit of a conductor who had perished in a tragic accident near track 7, forever doomed to patrol the yard, guiding lost souls but also claiming those who wander too close. The legend spoke of his lantern, glowing with a ghostly light, flickering between worlds. A beacon and a warning. As I pieced together the fragments of history, the connection became chillingly clear. The lights I had seen, the orbs drifting along the tracks, were no mere reflections or electrical anomalies. They were the lanterns of the lost. A spectral procession, forever reliving a tragedy that time refused to erase. The yard was a place where past and present collided. Where the echoes of the vanished reached out through the veil. And where I, caught in their gaze, had become part of the haunting. The official report on the disappearance of the 3 railway workers cited desertion, claiming personal troubles had driven them to flee town together. But a small article in the local paper told a different story. Family members insisted the men were stable, reliable workers with no reason to leave. In 1949, a night watchman, someone who had held my exact position, suffered a complete psychological breakdown. He was found at dawn, curled in a fetal position beside track 7, muttering about lights that watched and those who walked between the rails. He never recovered enough to explain what had happened. Other incidents dotted the decades. Maintenance crews refused to work the south section. Equipment inexplicably failed near track 7. Workers reported unexplained lights and phantom train whistles where no trains ran for years. The pattern was unmistakable. But what did it mean? I became obsessed with documenting my experiences. Each sighting, time, location, movement patterns, my physical and emotional responses, everything recorded meticulously. I sketched maps of the yard, marking where the lights appeared most frequently. Track 7 was the epicenter. But the activity spread outward week by week, like ripples in a pond. Then the dreams began. I found myself standing beside track 7 in the darkest hours of night. The air was unnaturally still, sounds muffled as if underwater. The lights approached, not amber this time, but a sickly blue-white, arranging themselves in a circle around me. From each light, a shadow stretched along the ground, reaching toward my feet. I always woke before contact, sheets soaked in sweat, throat raw as if from screaming. My supervisor noticed the change in me, the dark circles, the jumpiness. He suggested time off. I refused. Whatever was happening, I needed to understand it. Last week, during a thorough exploration of the warehouse near track 7, I discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath decades of dust and debris. It took all my strength to lift it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The stale air rose, heavy with a metallic scent, like copper pennies left too long in the sun. My flashlight flickered as I descended, the concrete walls pressing in. At the bottom was a small room, about 15 feet square. Its walls covered with faded photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes connected by strands of red yarn. An investigation board created by someone long before me. At the center hung a yellowed photograph dated October 1887, showing railway workers posed beside newly laid track. Their faces were solemn, etched with 19th century formality. But what chilled me was the background, barely visible, but unmistakable. 7 orbs of light hovered above the rails. The truth slammed into me with physical force. The lights predated any tragedy. They had been there from the beginning. Among the papers was a leather-bound journal, cracked with age. Its cramped, desperate handwriting detailed an experience uncannily like mine. The author, signed only M., described the lights, their movements, and the impossibility of capturing them with the photographic technology of the time. The entries grew frantic, documenting dreams identical to mine and a growing certainty that the lights sought communication. The final entry, dated November 1888, contained a single chilling sentence. "They are not lights, they are windows, and something is looking through." The air at the bottom of the stairs was thick, almost viscous, carrying a silence so profound it pressed against my eardrums. I stepped into the small room, the flashlight's beam trembling as it swept across the walls. Faded photographs stared back, faces frozen in time, eyes filled with a haunting mix of hope and despair. Newspaper clippings yellowed with age told of disappearances, strange sightings, and official reports that never quite explained the truth. Threads of red yarn connected names, dates, and locations in a chaotic web, a desperate attempt to find meaning where there was none. My gaze fell upon the journal. I flipped through the brittle pages, the cramped script revealing the mind unraveling beneath the weight of what was seen and heard. The author's words spoke of a force beyond understanding. A presence that watched from another realm, using the lights as windows to our world. The final entries grew darker, descriptions of voices whispering through the tracks, shadows moving just beyond sight, and a creeping madness that claimed the souls of those who looked too long. The last line chilled me to the bone, they come not for the living, but for the ones who see. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a metallic clink from the stairs above. My heart hammered. Was I alone down here? The presence that had haunted Track 7, the lights, the shadows, they were not just stories. They were warnings. I climbed the stairs with trembling hands, determined to face whatever waited in the dark. The warehouse seemed colder, the air heavier as I emerged back into the night. The lights flickered on the tracks, distant but unmistakable. I knew then that this was far from over. As I stepped back into the warehouse's cold embrace, the night seemed to pulse around me, thick with anticipation and unseen eyes. The flickering lights danced ahead, ghostly orbs tracing their eerie paths along the rusted rails. My breath came in ragged gasps, each step echoing in the cavernous silence. The air grew colder, biting through my jacket, as if warning me to turn back. But something, a stubborn spark of resolve, drove me forward. The lights gathered near the far end of the tracks, clustering like stars trapped in a dark sky. Suddenly, they converged, merging into a brilliant blaze that illuminated the rust and ruin. From that glow, figures began to emerge, ethereal shapes, translucent yet unmistakably human. Their faces bore the weight of sorrow and unfinished business. They moved silently, their eyes fixed on me, watchful, mournful, and ancient. A voice echoed in my mind, distant yet clear. You see us now. Fear and empathy battled within me. These were the lost souls, railway workers caught between worlds, tethered to Track 7 by tragedy and unresolved fate. I wanted to ask how I could help, how to free them. But before I could speak, the lights flickered, and the vision dissolved into darkness. The warehouse returned to shadow and silence, but the imprint of that encounter lingered, searing itself into my memory. I knew the path ahead was perilous. The railway yard's secrets were not just history, they were a living curse. And I had become entwined in its unraveling. My hands shook so violently I could barely climb back up the stairs. The remainder of my shift was spent confined to the security office, refusing my rounds, flinching at every sound. When dawn finally broke, I fled the yard without completing paperwork. Driving home at reckless speeds, I called in sick for the next 2 shifts. Jenkins sounded more relieved than annoyed, telling me to take all the time I needed. But isolation proved worse than exposure. At home, every shadow seemed to harbor watching eyes. Sleep eluded me unless every light in the house was blazing. Even then, dreams of Track 7 invaded my rest. Last night, I returned to work. I told myself I needed answers. But the truth was far simpler, and far more terrifying. The lights had begun appearing in my apartment. At first, just fleeting glimpses. Amber flashes in my peripheral vision, gone the moment I turned. But now they were stronger, more persistent. They were following me. Distance no longer mattered. As I write this in the security office, huddled beneath harsh fluorescent lights, I see them through the window. Dozens of glowing orbs drifting across the yard, converging on this building. My phone camera shows nothing. But I no longer need proof. I know what I see is real. The lights have changed. They are brighter. Within each orb, I glimpse movement, something pressing against some membrane between worlds. Sometimes, too angular, too fluid to be human faces. But faces nonetheless. Watching. Waiting. I understand now what M discovered over a century ago. The lights are not ghosts or paranormal phenomena. They are observers from somewhere else, using these lights as windows to study our world. Track 7 is where they first found a weak point between their reality and ours. For generations, they've watched and learned. Now, I believe, they're ready for more than observation. The radio crackles with static. Through the white noise, distorted voices whisper words that almost make sense. The lights have surrounded the building, pressing against the windows. And I have a terrible realization. Every time I see them, more lights appear. Every time I acknowledge them, they grow stronger. They don't just watch anymore. They know I see them. They know I understand. And now, God help me, they're starting to open. Story 5, The Willow Creek Inn. The moment I stepped into the Willow Creek Inn, something felt wrong. Not overt, but deep, a primal unease that raised the hairs on my neck. The lobby was quaint, antique furniture, faded floral wallpaper. Yet, a heaviness hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I chalked it up to exhaustion from the 5-hour drive through winding mountain roads. A business trip had brought me here, to this forgotten rural corner of America, where cell reception flickered between one bar and none. Mrs. Holloway, the innkeeper, was a gaunt woman, skin like crumpled parchment. Her eyes never met mine fully as she processed my reservation. Her fingers trembled slightly over the ancient registry book. She assigned me to room 8, at the far end of the second-floor hallway. Handed me a metal key, not a card. Her cold fingers brushed mine. I suppressed a shudder. "Breakfast is at 7, she informed me in a voice as dry as autumn leaves. "And please, Mr. Garrett, remain in your room after midnight. The old floors, they creak something terrible, and our other guests value their sleep." I nodded, but something in her tone suggested a warning beyond mere noise complaints. The corridor to room 8 stretched before me, dimly lit by flickering sconces that cast long, dancing shadows along the faded wallpaper. Each step echoed softly on the worn wooden floor, a hollow reminder of the inn's long history. The key in my hand felt heavier than it should, cold and unfamiliar. As I reached the door, I hesitated, a subtle chill curling in my spine despite the warmth of the summer evening outside. Inside, the room was modest, antique furnishings worn by time, a heavy wooden dresser, and a narrow bed covered with a faded quilt. The windows were thick with dust, filtering the fading light into muted hues. I unpacked silently, the quietness wrapping around me like a shroud. The faint creaks of the old and whispered through the walls, as if the house itself breathed in slow, uneven rhythms. That night, as midnight approached, the warning Mrs. Holloway gave settled heavily in my mind. I found myself drawn to the window, gazing out into the blackness where the silhouettes of gnarled trees clawed at the sky. A sudden creak from the floorboard startled me. The house seemed alive with sound, the soft murmur of footsteps above, the faint rustle of unseen movement. I tried to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was just the building settling. Yet beneath that rational thought, a deeper unease grew. At the stroke of midnight, the creaking grew louder, deliberate, rhythmic. Then, a whisper slipped through the darkness, so faint I barely caught it, "Don't leave." My breath caught in my throat. I turned sharply, but the room was empty, shadows pooling in the corners like watching eyes. I pressed the heavy quilt tighter around me, my pulse thudding in my ears. The old floors creaked again, as if footsteps paced just beyond the walls, waiting. As I gathered my bag to head upstairs, my eyes wandered to a narrow hallway branching off from the main corridor. At its end stood a door unlike any other in the inn. While all the other doors wore a soft cream paint, this one was a deep, angry crimson. A heavy padlock secured it firmly. Carved into its worn frame were small religious symbols, crosses, stars, and other markings I couldn't identify. Mrs. Holloway noticed my gaze lingering and cleared her throat softly. When I asked about that door, her voice tightened, wrinkles deepening into creases around her mouth. that room has been sealed for 43 years. For spiritual reasons. Before I could press her, she busied herself with paperwork, effectively ending the conversation. Her sudden dismissal only stoked my curiosity more, but I respected her desire to avoid the topic. The floorboards groaned beneath me as I climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. With each step, the air grew noticeably cooler, as if the house exhaled a breath of ancient secrets. My room was simple but clean, a double bed with an iron frame, a small writing desk by the window, and a bathroom last updated during the Reagan years. I set my laptop down, intending to review documents before dinner. Though the rural development project seemed straightforward, the isolation of the location now made more sense. That first night passed without incident, though sleep was restless. The mattress seemed to remember someone else's shape, gently pushing me toward its center. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I awoke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. They were slow, measured, and oddly irregular. Step, step, drag. Step, step, drag. I reminded myself of Mrs. Holloway's warning about creaky floors and pulled the covers higher. But the footsteps paused just outside my door, then continued down the hall. The next day was swallowed by meetings at the development site 2 miles away. By evening, a fierce storm rolled in. Sheets of rain battered the inn's windows. After a lonely dinner at the town diner, I returned to find the power out. Mrs. Holloway gave me candles, her gaunt face flickering in the trembling flames. She apologized, explaining storm outages were common here. When I asked about the backup generator behind the building, she stiffened. "It's reserved for essential systems," she said, avoiding my gaze. Before I could ask what that meant for a 12-room inn, she handed me a box of matches and slipped away into shadow. The candles cast elongated shadows, stretching across my room like silent watchers. The storm raged without relent. Without the hum of the old HVAC system, every noise seemed magnified. Water gurgled in the pipes. Wind whistled through an unseen crack. And somewhere in the building, something, or someone, moved. Around midnight, suspended between waking and sleep, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought a branch tapped the window. But the steady rhythm suggested otherwise. Tap. 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 It stopped for several minutes, then resumed louder. I sat up, straining to locate the source. The sound seemed to come from below, perhaps the first floor. Sleep fled. My mind tangled between curiosity and caution. Eventually, I threw off the covers, grabbed my phone for its flashlight. Mrs. Holloway's warning echoed in my mind. Yet, curiosity overwhelmed me. I stepped into the hallway. The ancient floorboards screamed beneath my careful steps. The hallway stretched before me, cloaked in darkness pierced only by the wavering beam of my phone's flashlight. The rhythmic tapping had ceased, leaving a heavy silence that pressed against my skin like cold water. I moved cautiously, each step careful but urgent, drawn toward the narrow stairway that descended beneath the inn, the cellar, long sealed and whispered about in fearful tones. The heavy wooden door at the stair's base was ajar, revealing a gaping maw of blackness. The air wafting up was thick and stale, carrying a scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Taking a deep breath, I stepped down. The walls closed in as the light flickered, casting monstrous shadows that danced and twisted. The cellar was a labyrinth of forgotten rooms and passageways, walls stained by time, floorboards warped and broken. Faint scrawls marked some surfaces, symbols I couldn't decipher but felt instinctively ominous. In the dim light, I noticed a door unlike the others, scarred, ancient, bound with rusted iron bands. The same deep crimson hue as the forbidden door upstairs, its surface etched with arcane symbols. My hand trembled as I reached out. A sudden coldness snatched at my skin, a whisper brushing my ear, "Turn back." But the need to know burned too fiercely. I grasped the iron ring and pulled. The door groaned open to reveal a small chamber, walls lined with old relics, tarnished silverware, faded photographs, and a cracked mirror. Its glass, though clouded with age, shimmered faintly, reflecting not the chamber but an endless void. I stepped closer. A voice echoed, distant but clear, "The past never sleeps." The tapping grew clearer with every step down the cold, narrow stairs. It came from the end of the hallway, behind that crimson door. As I drew near, the sound changed, shifting from a timid tap to a faint scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood. Then, silence swallowed everything. I stood before the door, flashlight beam trembling as it illuminated the carved symbols framing the wood. Close up, I noticed dark stains crusted around the keyhole, old, but unmistakable against the deep red paint. "Is someone there?" I whispered, feeling foolish but unable to resist. "Silence," came the reply, barely audible. Just as I turned to leave, a voice, so soft I almost convinced myself it was imagination, slipped from beyond the door. "Please," it pleaded, stretched and broken, barely recognizable. "Let me out." My heart hammered in my chest, cold sweat breaking across my skin, soaking my shirt. I tried to rationalize, wind through cracks, a prank by another guest. But deep down, I knew the voice carried something otherworldly, like it spoke through water, from a great distance and terrible depth. "Who's in there?" My voice felt alien, distant even to myself. The scratching resumed, now urgent and insistent. "I've been waiting so long. Please, the key, find the key." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my feet, mind racing for explanations: squatter, trapped animal, elaborate hoax. None quieted the primal terror screaming within me. I fled upstairs, double-checked my door's lock, and hid beneath the covers. Sleep was elusive until dawn's pale light. At breakfast, I watched Mrs. Holloway closely. Her practiced motions in the dim dining room belied the tremble of her hands as she refilled my coffee. I casually mentioned the strange noises, watching her closely. Her eyes locked onto mine with a fierce intensity. Fear. Warning. She insisted it was the storm, the old building settling. But I felt the truth linger, unspoken and heavy between us. That day, instead of the development site, I sought answers at the local library. The kindly librarian's expression tightened when I mentioned the inn. She pointed me toward archives from the summer of 1977 with guarded hesitation. What I found froze the blood in my veins. In June 1977, a traveling salesman named Richard Mercer vanished from the inn. Room 12, behind the crimson door. His belongings untouched, his car still parked. The investigation grew cold quickly, unresolved. Other disappearances followed, scattered across the years, never enough to form a clear pattern, but all linked to the inn. All guests of Room 12. That evening, my mind swirled with dark theories. Logic urged me to leave, find refuge elsewhere for my remaining nights. But something rooted me there, morbid curiosity, or something deeper, unnameable. The tapping began earlier that night, around 10 p.m. No longer tentative but frantic, desperate. Lying rigid beneath the covers, every nerve alight with tension, I listened as the sound grew into frantic scratching. Then the voice came again, clearer, louder. "Please. I know you're there. I can sense you. Help me." The desperate scratching continued, growing frantic and urgent, as if the unseen prisoner clawed not just at the door, but at the very fabric of the night itself. I lay frozen beneath my covers, heart pounding, caught between fear and a terrible empathy. The voice repeated, more insistent, its tone laced with exhaustion and hope. "Please, help me, find the key, set me free." Unable to remain passive, I rose and wrapped myself in a heavy sweater. The candlelight flickered in my trembling hands as I crept down the hallway, every creak and groan of the old inn magnified by the silence that hung between the walls. The crimson door loomed before me, its symbols seeming to writhe in the dim glow. My fingers brushed the cold iron padlock. No key. My mind raced. Who had locked this door? What fate had been sealed inside for over 4 decades? Why had Mrs. Holloway hidden the truth beneath vague warnings and silence? The tapping resumed, a rhythmic plea, pulling me closer to the edge of something unspeakable. Summoning every ounce of courage, I resolved to seek the key. A silent promise echoed in the dark. I will not leave you here. The night thickened as I searched the inn for the key, my flashlight sweeping over ancient furniture, dusty shelves, and forgotten corners. The air felt charged, as if the building itself watched my every move. Mrs. Holloway's warning echoed in my mind, yet I pressed on, driven by a mix of dread and compassion. In the lobby, beneath a loose floorboard near the reception desk, I found a small, rusted box. Inside lay an ornate iron key, cold and heavy in my palm. A chill ran through me, this was the key. With trembling hands, I ascended the stairs to room 12. The hallway seemed to pulse with silence, the shadows deeper than before. At the crimson door, I fit the key into the lock. It resisted briefly, then turned with a reluctant creak. The door swung open to reveal a narrow, dimly lit room. Dust motes danced in shafts of moonlight filtering through a curtained window. In the center stood an old rocking chair, swaying gently despite the still air. As I stepped inside, a figure materialized, an ethereal woman with hollow eyes and a face etched with sorrow. Her voice was a whisper, carried on the breath of the room. "Thank you, for hearing me." The room seemed to breathe with a life of its own as the ethereal woman's form flickered like a candle's flame. Her hollow eyes held centuries of sorrow, yet there was a fragile hope shimmering beneath the despair. She spoke, her voice a fragile thread weaving through the stillness. "I am Eleanor, bound here by fear and betrayal. Long ago, a darkness came to this place, a curse born from greed and violence. They locked me away, fearing what I knew, what I saw. The key you hold is more than metal, it is a promise, a chance for release." Her gaze pierced mine, imploring. "But beware, freeing me will awaken the past. The inn's shadows are restless. The truth demands a price." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing against my soul. "I am ready," I whispered, heart pounding. With a nod, she reached out, her translucent hand brushing my cheek, a chill that seared through me. The room darkened, and the air thickened. A low whisper rose around us, the inn itself stirring as forgotten secrets clawed their way back into the light. Eleanor's eyes, once hollow, now shimmered with a fierce intensity as she spoke again. "This place is bound by pain, betrayal, and secrets that claw beneath its foundation. My captivity was no accident. I was silenced because I knew what lay beneath the ground, an evil that festers still." Her gaze bore into mine. "To free me is to awaken what slumbers, to rip open wounds best left closed." A chill curled through my veins. "What must I do?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then gestured toward the far wall where faded symbols carved in the plaster glowed faintly. "You must face the darkness below. The curse is tied to the very soil of this inn. Only by confronting it can you break the chains that bind me, and perhaps all who came before." As she spoke, the floor beneath us trembled, a low rumble echoing like the growl of some ancient beast. A trapdoor appeared in the center of the floor, dust swirling as it slowly creaked open. From the depths rose a chill so fierce it bit into my very soul. With resolve hardening like tempered steel, I stepped toward the opening. The path ahead was dark and uncertain. But there was no turning back. The air grew colder as I peered down into the yawning darkness revealed by the trapdoor. A faint draft rose, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something far more ancient, an undercurrent of decay and whispered agony. I grasped the edges of the wooden ladder and began my descent. Each rung creaked beneath my weight, echoing down into the blackness below. The beam from my flashlight cut a narrow path through the thick shadows, revealing rough stone walls slick with moisture and time. As I reached the bottom, the oppressive silence was shattered by a distant drip of water, each drop falling like a heartbeat in the cavernous chamber. The floor was uneven, strewn with debris, fragments of old pottery, rusted tools, and shattered glass that glinted ominously. Ahead, faded symbols adorned the walls, arcane sigils etched deep into the stone, pulsing faintly with an eerie blue light. They seemed alive, writhing beneath my gaze as though reacting to my presence. A heavy sense of watching pressed upon me. The shadows flickered at the edge of the light, coalescing into indistinct shapes that seemed to shift and retreat with every step I took. Then, from the darkness, a voice, a low, guttural murmur, rose, speaking words not meant for mortal ears. The air vibrated with a malignant energy, thickening around me like a living thing. My heart hammered, but I pressed forward. Eleanor's plea echoed in my mind, the curse must be confronted, the chains broken. The path ahead was a descent not only into the physical depths but into the heart of an ancient darkness that had long been buried, and now thirsted for release. Despite every instinct screaming to stay away, I found myself once again in that dim hallway, drawn irresistibly to the crimson door. The scratching stopped as I stepped closer, the air thick with expectation and fear. "Who are you?" I asked, pressing my palm to the weathered wood. A long silence. Then "I don't remember anymore. It's been so long, so dark in here." My throat tightened painfully. "What happened to you?" Another pause. "She tricked me," the voice whispered, trembling yet resolute. "Said there was something I needed to see. Then the door, it locked behind me. Said it was necessary. That I was chosen." I swallowed hard. "Holloway?" "Yes. Mrs. Holloway. Her family. Generations of them. They feed it. Keep it satisfied. But it's hungry again, so hungry." A cold dread spread like poison through my veins. "Feed what?" The voice twisted, losing its human edge. "Me." The scratching resumed, frantic and furious, joined by a guttural sound, laughter. Sobbing. Both? I stumbled back, breath ragged, the air pressing against my skin like unseen hands. The carved symbols on the doorframe glowed faintly, sickly and alive. I fled to my room, slamming the door behind me, hands shaking violently as I packed. I had to leave, tonight. But as my fingers brushed the doorknob, a new horror dawned. The scratching was now coming from inside my own room, just beyond the door. Mrs. Holloway's voice drifted through the wood, deep and terrible, nothing like before. "No one ever really leaves the Willow Creek Inn." The doorknob turned slowly, deliberately. I backed away, heart pounding, vision narrowing as panic threatened to consume me. From deep within the inn came a low, reverberating hum that vibrated through the air itself. The doorknob stopped turning. Mrs. Holloway, or what spoke through her, cursed softly. "It's calling me back, but I'll return, and you'll still be here." Footsteps faded down the hall. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, until silence stretched thin and doubt gnawed at me. I crept to the door, pressed my ear, nothing. Trembling, I turned the lock and cracked the door open. The hallway lay empty, bathed in pale dawn light filtering from a distant window. I gathered my courage, suitcase in hand, and moved quietly toward the stairs. As I passed the crimson door, I froze. No sound stirred within. On the floor before it lay a rusted, ancient key. Had Mrs. Holloway dropped it? Or did it appear by some darker, inexplicable means? For one mad moment, I reached to take it. Sanity reasserted itself. Whatever dwelled behind that door, victim or predator or both, was a horror beyond my comprehension. I left the key and continued toward freedom. In the lobby, the registration book lay open. My name was the only one recorded that week. There had been no elderly couple at breakfast. I drove away from the Willow Creek Inn as the sun rose, pushing the car beyond safe speeds. In the rearview mirror, the inn shrank, disappeared around the bend. But even now, hundreds of miles away, I still hear that voice in my dreams. Still feel the oppressive weight of that place pressing down on me. And I know, some doors never truly close. The sun sank low behind the western horizon, painting the empty Pinewood Mall parking lot in long, fading shadows. All shadows, that is, except one. There he stood, a tall, slender man in a dark suit, next to a black sedan. Yet where his shadow should have stretched across the cracked asphalt, there was only empty pavement. As if light passed through him, untouched. My breath caught. Everyone casts a shadow. It's physics, fundamental and absolute. Yet here was a man who did not. I'd stayed late at the office, drowning in spreadsheets and projections, the dull, endless tide of corporate life. But now, primal senses sharpened, alert and alive. My fingers clenched my keys, metal biting into my palm as I wrestled between flight and curiosity. Curiosity won. The temperature had dropped since morning. Fog rolled in from the nearby lake, curling like spectral fingers around flickering lamp posts. I stepped out. The car door shut behind me with a hollow thud that echoed unnervingly. The man made no move or sound in response. I approached, trying for casual steps. He jerked suddenly, fluid but mechanical, opening his car door and reaching inside with unnatural haste, like a man late for a critical appointment. Yet his movements made no sound. No fabric rustle. No metal clang. Nothing. 20 feet away, my throat tightened. Something about him was wrong, primal, unnameable. A predator's presence, recognized before understanding. Cold sweat broke across my forehead. I cleared my throat, ready to offer help, a flimsy excuse. But the words died before they left. He straightened and turned partially toward me. His face remained shrouded in shadow, unnaturally so, given the dying sunlight. Only vague, watching eyes gleamed from within the darkness. My heart hammered wildly. I wanted to run. But my feet were rooted. He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that pressed down like a physical weight. A tremor seized my arms. He took a step, silent as the grave. I croaked out a question about the time, mundane, absurd under the circumstances. He did not reply. Instead, he pulled from his pocket an object gleaming briefly in the fading light. An antique pocket watch. The pocket watch gleamed coldly in the dying light, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer as if alive. The shadowless man held it up, letting it catch the last rays of the sun before flipping it open with a smooth, deliberate motion. Inside, the watch face was unlike any I had seen. No numbers marked the hours, only strange symbols that pulsed faintly with an ethereal glow. The hands spun slowly, but not in the steady rhythm of a normal clock. They moved in jerks and pauses, as if keeping time to some unseen cadence. A low hum vibrated through the air, subtle but insistent, growing louder with each passing second. My breath hitched. This was no ordinary timepiece. It was a relic from another world, or perhaps another dimension entirely. The man's gaze bore into me, unblinking and intense. Without speaking, he slowly swung the watch back and forth, like a pendulum. "Watch the time," the unspoken command echoed in my mind, pressing against my thoughts with unnerving clarity. I found myself unable to look away. The world around me seemed to blur and twist, colors draining from the scene, sounds muffling until only the swinging watch and my own heartbeat remained. Then, suddenly, the watch stopped. The man's face sharpened from shadow into something horrifyingly real, eyes gleaming with dark knowledge, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. Time snapped back into focus, the fog rolling away as if a veil had been lifted. The man was gone. Only the empty space where he had stood remained, and the lingering echo of that unnatural presence. The sudden disappearance of the shadowless man left a hollow stillness in the fading light. Yet the eerie echo of his presence lingered, an unshakable weight pressing on my mind. The pocket watch, swinging in his vanished hand moments before, seemed to pulse faintly in the air, as if tethered to some unseen force. In the days that followed, I delved into research, ancient texts, folklore, and obscure legends seeking answers. The name that surfaced time and again was the Keeper of Lost Time, a spectral guardian said to wander between moments, collecting those who have slipped through the cracks of reality. It was said he appeared to those trapped in liminal spaces, between life and death, past and future, offering them a chance to reclaim lost moments or condemning them to eternal stasis. The antique pocket watch, I learned, was no mere artifact. It was a vessel of temporal power, an anchor to the realms between worlds. Those who gazed too long risked becoming trapped in time's endless loop, shadows without substance, forever forgotten. I realized the shadowless man was no predator but a sentinel, a harbinger of choices no one dared to make. His silent, watchful gaze was an invitation and a warning. The question haunted me, what choice had I been offered? Had I seen a glimpse of a fate I narrowly escaped? Or was the keeper still waiting, for me or someone else? One evening, as twilight bled into night, I glimpsed a shadow without a source lurking at the edge of my vision. The air grew cold and still. I knew then, the keeper had not forgotten me. And time itself was drawing tight around my soul. The face of the pocket watch swirled in and out of focus, numbers drifting like smoke on a restless wind. When I dared to lift my gaze, the shadowless man had closed the distance between us without a sound, a blink and he was 10 feet closer, as if reality itself had skipped a beat. My breath hitched, instinct propelled me backward with hurried thanks that barely left my lips. Fog thickened, curling around lamp posts and bleeding the world into muted halos. The night swallowed sound and shape alike. His breath, or lack of it, did not mingle with the cold air. Where mine formed fleeting clouds, he exhaled nothing. No blink. No pulse. Just that unnerving stillness. Panic fueled my retreat until a glance over my shoulder revealed he had vanished, just like that. Only the black sedan remained, a silent sentinel in the mist. Heart pounding, I spun in circles, desperate for a sign, any sign. The lot was swallowed by silence except for a distant hum beyond the mall's edge. I broke into a run, flinging myself toward my car. Keys tumbled from trembling hands, and the world narrowed to my frantic fumbling. Then, a reflection in the window, frozen blood in my veins. Behind me, impossibly close, stood the shadowless man. I hadn't heard him approach. Hadn't felt him. A strangled cry caught in my throat as I whirled, empty space. Hands shaking violently, I finally pressed unlock. Doors locked. Engine roared, a frail shield against the gathering darkness. As headlights swept the lot, the black sedan's figure reappeared, still and spectral. Light passed through him like smoke, casting no shadow, no silhouette. My foot slammed the accelerator, tires screamed into the night. The drive home was a blur of fear and vigilance. The rearview mirror promised a chase that never came, but my mind refused to be convinced. At my apartment, safety felt fragile, locks double-checked, blinds drawn tight. I collapsed, trembling, haunted by a shadow that seemed to linger just beyond sight. Sleep eluded me, each creak, each distant sound a threat. By dawn, exhaustion dulled terror, and I convinced myself it was stress, hallucination. But the research I dove into was no comfort. Across cultures and centuries, shadowless beings haunt lore. Souls collectors, harbingers of fate, echoes of those trapped between worlds. The shadowless man's voice filled my mind, smooth and cold, bypassing all barriers of sound. He spoke not with lips, but with a presence that consumed thought and memory alike. I have watched you, he said, not for days or weeks, but for years, silent witness to your joys and fears, your moments forgotten even by yourself. Memories flickered unbidden, childhood secrets, whispered fears, moments I had buried deep. How could he know? He offered a choice, terrible and tantalizing. To join me is to step beyond the confines of time, to escape the fragile bounds of flesh and memory. To become shadowless, free from the pain of mortal limits. A cold allure, promising freedom from loss, from loneliness, from fear. Yet beneath the offer lurked something darker. A price unspoken, a tether that would bind my soul to endless wandering, an existence untethered from life and death alike. I felt the weight of that choice crushing down, a destiny between light and void. The theater's silence deepened as the curtains fluttered with an unfelt breeze. The spotlight dimmed, leaving only the shadows and the echo of his unvoiced words. Would I embrace the shadowless fate, or flee into the uncertain light of my mortal world? My heart pounded, each beat a frantic plea for clarity as the silence stretched between us. His presence was both a sanctuary and a prison, an invitation to transcendence cloaked in shadow. To be shadowless, he whispered within my mind, is to become eternal, untethered by time's cruel march. No fear, no pain, no loss. Only endless existence. The temptation was a siren song, promising release from the fragile, fleeting nature of life. But as the words echoed, I glimpsed the cost, the slow erasure of self, the hollowing of soul. I took a trembling breath, feeling the weight of 1,000 whispered memories, my life's joys and sorrows woven into a fragile tapestry. Could I surrender it all for cold immortality? The theater walls seemed to close in, shadows lengthening into endless corridors of night. A voice within rose, fierce and defiant. No, I whispered, I choose to live, to feel the pain and beauty of being human. The shadowless man's form flickered, a ripple of disappointment, or was it respect? The spotlight faded, and the theater dissolved into mist and memory. I found myself alone on an empty street as dawn's first light brushed the horizon. The pocket watch lay cold in my palm, its ticking resumed, steady, mortal. The encounter had changed me. A reminder of the fragile light we all carry against the encroaching void. The shadowless man's bargain lingered like a poison in my veins, a promise of freedom tethered to a slow, agonizing loss. Memories slipping away, moments erased as if they'd never existed. I wasn't sure if I'd escaped or only begun the slow unraveling into what he was. My shadow, once familiar, now flickered with strange life, out of sync with my every move, a tether to a fate I dreaded. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, his voice would whisper, cold and seductive, reminding me how fragile human connections are, how time itself was meaningless. I found myself drawn to empty parking lots at sunset, eyes searching, heart aching. Hungry. The first creak came near the front door, a soft, deliberate step that stopped me cold, spoon frozen midair as soup cooled on my tongue. Nobody should have been there. I'd been sure. The old country house my grandparents abandoned had been empty for 11 years. I was the first to return in over a decade. The creaking footsteps repeated, slow, heavy, purposeful. Not the random settling of old wood, but something alive, moving with intent. I didn't investigate that first night. But the sound stayed with me, a rhythm woven into the silence. The house settled around me like a living thing, old bones creaking with secrets and sorrow. Each night, the footsteps returned, growing louder, closer, impossibly deliberate. I lay awake, listening to the slow march echo through the empty halls, my heart a frantic drum in the stillness. The air thickened with anticipation, as if the very walls waited with bated breath. On the second night, the footsteps paused just beyond my bedroom door. I held my breath, willing the courage to rise, but fear anchored me to the bed. A whisper drifted through the darkness, indistinct but filled with longing. Something was here. Something that had been waiting. The following day, I found traces, footprints pressed faintly into the dust, too large and heavy for any living visitor. And a chill lingered in the air, a cold that refused to be warmed by sunlight. With each passing night, the presence grew bolder. Doors creaked open on their own. Shadows flickered in corners where no light reached. And I felt, always, the weight of unseen eyes watching. The clock's glow bathed the room in a pale, eerie light. 3:12 a.m. A soft creak echoed from the foyer. I froze, spoon poised mid-air, heart hammering. The footsteps began again, slow and deliberate, tracing the same path I had memorized. Foyer, staircase, hallway, toward my room. Each creak was like a breath in the darkness, a presence making itself known. I fought to remain still, every nerve screaming with fear and disbelief. The footsteps halted just outside my door. The silence that followed was heavier than the sounds. My chest tightened, air scarce, until a ragged gasp broke through. My flashlight trembled as I swept its beam across the room and into the hall. Empty. Alone. Logic fought the terror. Old houses settle, I told myself. Noise carries differently at night. But the precision, the pattern, no loose board, no stray animal could mimic that deliberate rhythm. The next day, the diner's waitress eyed me with a mix of pity and warning. "Edgar at the Historical Society," she suggested gently. A stubborn part of me refused to heed the call toward the supernatural. Engineering had trained me to seek facts, not ghosts. That night, I bathed the house in light, radio humming, eyes fixed on the foyer. Determined to catch the source of the footsteps. Exhaustion tugged at me, but resolve held firm. At exactly 3 a.m., my breath hitched. The second stretched, taut and trembling as the clock edged toward 3:12 a.m. The air around me thickened, each breath feeling heavier, laden with a silence so dense it pressed against my skin like a physical weight. Then, the first creak pierced the stillness, soft, deliberate, echoing from the foyer. My heart seized, every muscle tensing as I fixed my gaze on the dim hallway ahead. Step by step, the sounds came closer, up the staircase, across the hall, measured, purposeful, yet devoid of life. Each footfall was a slow drumbeat marking time in a house that refused to rest. When the footsteps stopped just outside my door, the silence fell like a shroud. My breath hitched painfully, and I dared not move, trapped between disbelief and dread. Suddenly, a faint whisper slipped through the darkness, a voice, ancient and fragile, barely more than a breath, "Remember." The word echoed in my mind, weaving through forgotten memories and lost fragments of the past. I felt a chill crawl along my spine as the room seemed to breathe with unseen presence. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the silence reclaimed the house. The footsteps faded, leaving only the steady ticking of the old clock and my own ragged breaths. In that moment, I understood, the house was alive with memories, restless and waiting. And I was no longer a stranger in my grandparents' home, I was a part of its story, woven into its haunted tapestry. The silence after the footsteps was more terrifying than their presence, the absence of sound pressing in like a suffocating fog. Minutes dragged. 3:15, 3:20. 3:30, still nothing. Relief began to soften my tense muscles. Maybe it had all been imagination, or a fleeting weather-related trick of sound. A faint smile touched my lips, an attempt at self-reassurance. Then the overhead light flickered, once, twice, before plunging the room into total darkness. Simultaneously, the radio died, leaving a void so absolute it felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. In that suffocating blackness, the first creak sounded behind me. I stumbled forward, knocking over the coffee table, pain exploding in my shin. The creaks came faster, heavy, deliberate steps closing in. Adrenaline flooded my veins, my heart thundered painfully in my chest. I tried to scream but only a choked whimper escaped. Fumbling for my phone, my trembling fingers dropped it twice before activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. Empty space where my senses screamed something lurked. The footsteps circled, relentless, the floor's vibration pounding through my soles. The cold hit me like a blast, a pocket of frigid air pressed against me. My light revealed only shadows and dust, but every instinct screamed I was being watched. Panic broke free, I bolted toward the front door. Sweaty hands slipped on the knob, but I wrenched it open and spilled onto the porch. I spent the night in my car, locked doors, engine humming, heat battling the chill that clung to my bones. Dawn brought a fragile clarity. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Some force, fear mingled with determination, compelled me to understand what haunted this house. That morning, I visited the Historical Society. Edgar, stooped and weathered, recognized the address instantly. My grandfather bought the property in 1963, but the house's story stretched back to 1887. Edgar's voice dropped to a whisper as he spoke of Howard Thatcher, the original owner and clockmaker obsessed with time. Every room held mechanical clocks, perfectly synchronized to chime in unison. Thatcher reportedly patrolled the house each night at 3:12 a.m., following a precise route that ended in the master bedroom at 3:15. Eventually, Thatcher was committed to an asylum, convinced something was stalking his nightly rounds. Subsequent owners whispered similar tales, footsteps tracing Thatcher's path, creeping paranoia, silent terror. Many fled, others withdrew into isolation. My grandfather never spoke of these experiences, but his grim silence and the locks on his bedroom door now made grim sense. Armed with this knowledge, I returned. Part fear, part resolve drove me back to confront the time-warped curse that haunted my family's home. I spent the afternoon preparing, not to fight an unseen enemy, but to communicate. Research revealed Thatcher's tragic end, still obsessed, still hearing the footsteps, convinced time itself had been corrupted within those walls. That night, as the old clock hands crept toward 3:12 a.m., I settled in the dimly lit living room, clutching a worn journal I'd found among Thatcher's belongings at the Historical Society. Its pages were filled with frantic notes, sketches of clocks, and desperate pleas for understanding. I spoke aloud into the silence, hoping to bridge the gulf between past and present. Howard. I know you're here. I want to understand. The house seemed to hold its breath. Minutes stretched taut until the faintest creak whispered from the hallway, slow, measured footsteps echoing Thatcher's own nightly patrol. A chill curled around me as the old grandfather clock chimed 12 times, then 3:12 a.m. I rose cautiously, following the sound as it traced the familiar path. Each step felt weighted, heavy with sorrow and time's relentless pull. At the master bedroom door, I paused. With trembling hands, I placed my palm on the worn wood. Why do you linger? I whispered. The air grew colder. A low hum vibrated through the walls, like the steady ticking of 1,000 clocks beating out a sorrowful rhythm. Then, a voice, fragile, distant, but unmistakably human. Time is broken here, it said. Caught between moments. I am bound to watch, to wait, forever. I listened as the spirit of Howard Thatcher revealed a terrible truth. In his obsession, he had unwittingly fractured the flow of time within the house, trapping not only himself but all who dwelled here in an endless loop of footsteps and echoes. The clocks do not merely measure time, he explained. They hold it prisoner. As dawn approached, the footsteps faded, leaving me alone with the fragile light of morning, and a newfound understanding. The house was more than a place. It was a wound in time itself. The weight of Howard Thatcher's confession lingered in the morning light, a heavy truth that the house itself had become a prison for time. To undo this curse would mean untangling the threads of moments caught in endless repetition. Driven by a blend of dread and determination, I scoured Thatcher's journals for clues, desperate for any hint of how to restore balance. Among the frantic scrawls and detailed clock diagrams, one passage stood out. The heart of the house beats in the grand clock, stop its chime, and the cycle may break. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I approached the towering grandfather clock in the main hall, the source of the synchronized chimes that had governed the house's tortured rhythm. Its ornate face gleamed faintly in the dim light, the pendulum swinging with relentless precision. I hesitated, fingers trembling as I reached to silence the clock. The house seemed to exhale, the air thick with anticipation. With a firm breath, I stopped the pendulum. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, then, a tremor pulsed through the floorboards, a low, mournful moan rising from the walls. Shadows shifted and stretched as if the house itself struggled against the sudden stillness. A cold wind swept through the corridors, carrying whispered voices, fragments of time released from their prison. I felt a presence beside me, gentle yet powerful, the spirit of Howard Thatcher, no longer trapped but freed at last. "Thank you," his voice echoed softly. "Time can heal, if we have courage to face its broken pieces." As dawn broke, the house felt lighter, freed from its temporal chains. The footsteps ceased, the oppressive weight lifted, leaving only peace. Howard Thatcher's final ravings echoed in my mind, the ancient entity that had attached itself to his nightly routine, learning, mimicking, waiting to replace him. The chilling truth settled in, this was no mere haunting. It was a trap, a recursive nightmare feeding on time itself. That night, I sat in my dark bedroom, cross-legged beside the bed, heart pounding in my ears. The phone's glow read 3:11 a.m. 1 minute passed with unbearable slowness. At exactly 3:12, the first creak echoed from the entryway below. Step by deliberate step, the footsteps followed the familiar path, ascending the stairs, crossing the hall, approaching my room. I struggled to steady my breathing as the footsteps halted beside me at 3:15 a.m. Cold air swirled like a phantom tide. I spoke into the oppressive darkness, voice breaking. "I know about Thatcher. I know about his rounds. This isn't your house anymore. You need to break this pattern." The silence that followed felt charged, evaluative. The temperature dropped, my breath misting before me. Suddenly, the air shifted, thickening as if submerged in deep water, my ears popping painfully. The floor groaned beneath me, not with sharp creaks, but with a deep, sustained strain, as if the house itself was bending under unseen pressure. My phone flickered, the numbers blurred and twisted before locking on a haunting repetition, 3:15, 3:15, 3:15. Understanding dawned, cold and horrifying. The presence was trapped in the same 3 minutes, endlessly repeating, desperate for company. I felt invisible threads pulling at me, compelling me forward. My foot slid, unwilling, stepping toward the routine. Panic exploded. I broke free, retreating with everything I had. Rage filled the air like electricity. Objects vibrated, flew, smashing walls. The closet mirror shattered in a spiderweb crack. I fled, but the footsteps pursued, now breaking free of their pattern, hunting me directly. Reaching the front door, I grasped the knob, when suddenly every clock, hidden and known, began to chime in deafening unison. Frozen, I heard footsteps behind me. The door swung open, revealing a twisted, shifting version of the foyer, caught in multiple times at once. A shadowed figure stood there, pocket watch in hand, face hollow and empty. He beckoned, a silent invitation to join the eternal patrol. With a final roar, I slammed the door shut. Silence fell. No footsteps, no chimes, only ragged breath. I fled at dawn, donating the house to the Historical Society with one condition, never to be lived in again. Edgar asked why. I could only shake my head. Now, I wake at 3:15 a.m., muscles tense, listening for footsteps that never come. My new apartment, no wooden floors, no ticking clocks, just fragile peace. The house is gone from my life now, yet its shadow lingers in the quiet moments, when clocks tick a little too loudly, when the stillness of night feels heavy and charged. I carry with me a fragile understanding, that time is not merely measured by seconds and hours, but by memories held and moments lived. The presence that haunted the Wilson house was more than restless, it was trapped in a loop of its own making, a prisoner of repetition and loss. In facing it, I glimpsed a truth many deny, that time can wound, can fracture the self, and that breaking free requires courage not just to confront the past, but to release it. I think often about Howard Thatcher, a man undone by obsession, yet trapped by forces beyond comprehension. His footsteps echo in my dreams, a reminder that the past never truly leaves us, but can either bind or teach. I've learned to cherish the impermanence of memory, the fleeting beauty of a moment that cannot be owned but only experienced. Perhaps that is the true freedom, not to control time, but to live fully within it, accepting its passage as both gift and loss. Some nights, when the world is still and my mind wanders, I find solace in the ticking of a simple clock, a heartbeat in the quiet, a reminder that time moves forward, even after the darkest shadows fade. Sometimes, in the stillness, I feel vibrations through the concrete, like something pacing beneath the earth, searching, restless. I've thrown away every clock I owned, relying only on my phone for time. Yet I never look at it between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. Time bends in that house on Crooked Mile Road. It loops and traps. What walks those floors isn't a ghost in any traditional sense. It is something ancient, something that existed long before the house was built. Something that learned to use human patterns to move through our world. And sometimes, in the liminal space between waking and dreaming, I feel those invisible threads tugging at me, urging me back to the path I narrowly escaped. The route that always begins at 3:12 and ends somewhere I never want to reach. Story 8, The Well's Whisper. The first night in my uncle's farmhouse, I woke to my name, called out, not shouted, not whispered, but with a casual familiarity that sent a chill down my spine. It drifted through my open window on the still night air, like smoke creeping through the darkness. I told myself it was a dream and rolled over. Then it came again, my name spoken from somewhere outside, somewhere below. That's when I remembered the well. Earlier that day, I'd found it on the edge of a clearing, 50 yards from the house. Its stone rim crumbled and its opening was half covered by weathered wooden planks. At the time, I thought little of it, just another relic of the decrepit rural property that now belonged to me. But lying there in the darkness, listening to my name carried on the night wind, the image of the well burned in my mind with terrible clarity. Sleep abandoned me. Rigid in an unfamiliar bed, my ears straining for the sound that haunted the night. It didn't come back, not my name, but something else. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass, stone scraping stone, something climbing. Morning brought harsh light and a fragile rationality. The farmhouse settled, the darkness of the country was absolute, disorienting to my city-worn eyes. I told myself it was the wind, a nocturnal animal, or just the strangeness of a new place. The next day, sorting through my Uncle Sebastian's belongings, I found journals filled with paranoid ramblings about voices from below and eyes watching from darkness. I dismissed them as the lonely ravings of a recluse, but a chill crawled up my spine when I found a notebook with detailed sketches of the well, and transcriptions of one-sided conversations. That night, I closed the window tight and wedged a chair under the doorknob. Foolish, I thought, I'm a grown man, not afraid of monsters. But something about this house got under my skin. In the dead of night, the chair still held the door, the window was shut, yet unmistakably, impossibly, I heard my name called again. Not outside this time. From inside the house, just beyond my bedroom door. The doorknob turned slowly against the chair's resistance, once, twice, then silence. My heart pounded. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I wanted to scream, to demand who was there, but my voice was trapped deep inside. The air around the well was heavy with silence, yet beneath it, an ancient voice seemed to pulse, distant but insistent, like a heartbeat echoing through the earth. The wooden planks covering its mouth creaked under the weight of years, but the darkness beneath held something far older. Driven by a mixture of dread and curiosity, I found myself drawn to the well in the pale light of dawn. The stone rim was cold and rough, worn smooth only in places where hands had long since vanished. Leaning over, I peered into the abyss, an endless blackness that swallowed light and hope alike. From the depths, a whisper rose, barely audible, a sound caught between a sigh and a plea. It spoke of forgotten promises, of bargains struck in shadows long before the farmhouse stood. The voice was layered, ancient and youthful, human and something far beyond. Through the journals, I pieced together fragments of history. My Uncle Sebastian had been drawn into this voice, compelled to listen, to respond. His words, recorded in trembling ink, revealed a pact made generations ago, a binding between man and something that dwelled beneath the soil. The well was not merely a hole in the ground. It was a gateway, a mouth to a realm where time bent and reality frayed. What lurked below was a keeper of secrets, a watcher, feeding on the fear and memory of those who lingered too long. That night, I sat beside the well, whispering into the darkness, offering respect, seeking understanding. The tapping returned, soft at first, then urgent, as if the well itself was breathing, alive and waiting. A cold wind rose, carrying the scent of earth and decay. And then, a presence, close enough to touch, yet forever out of reach. The night air thickened around the well, the darkness seeming to pulse with a life of its own. I found myself returning night after night, drawn by a force I could neither resist nor fully understand. Whispers drifted upward, fragmented and fleeting, words that seemed almost human, yet layered with an alien cadence. I spoke softly, asking questions, offering fragments of my own story, hoping for a sign, a response. At times, the tapping answered in rhythm, a language of stone and shadow. Other moments, a chill swept over me, as if the well itself exhaled ancient breath. My mind swirled with images, flickers of faces both known and unknown, memories not my own, and shadows of events long past. The watcher beneath the well was no mere spirit. It was a sentinel, guarding secrets too terrible to name, bound by ancient laws older than the farmhouse. It fed not just on fear, but on memory and time itself, an echo trapped between worlds, seeking release or perhaps companionship. One night, the air grew impossibly cold. The well's whisper shifted, clearer, urgent, beckoning me closer. I felt tendrils of something unseen brush against my skin, tugging gently, inviting me to peer deeper into the abyss. Fear and fascination warred within me. To look too long might mean losing myself, becoming part of the well's eternal shadow. Yet the need to understand, to break the silence, was stronger still. As I leaned over the well's dark mouth, the whispers coalesced, no longer fragmented murmurs but a steady voice that resonated deep within me. It spoke of an ancient covenant forged in shadows long before the house existed. The well was a threshold, an ancient gateway between the living and the forgotten, a place where time tangled and souls could linger, trapped between worlds. The watcher beneath was a guardian and a prisoner, charged with preserving the balance between realms, but bound by an insatiable hunger for memory and presence. It fed on the echoes of those who dared to listen, collecting fragments of lives, stories, and fears to sustain its eternal vigil. Sebastian, my uncle, had been both victim and participant, drawn into the well's whispering web, compelled to guard its secret while losing himself piece by piece. His journals were warnings and confessions, cries for release from a fate he could neither escape nor fully accept. The well's truth was a lesson, and a curse. To peer into the abyss is to risk losing oneself to its depths. To hear its call is to become part of its endless story, caught in a loop of memory and shadow. But within that darkness also lay a fragile hope, that recognition, respect, and courage might one day free the watcher, and those bound to the well, from their timeless prison. As dawn crept over the farmhouse, I felt the weight of the well's truth settle within me. I was no longer just an inheritor of land and belongings. I was a keeper of stories, a witness to the fragile boundary between light and shadow, life and what lies beyond. The rational part of my mind insisted I was alone. I had searched every room, locked every door and window. Yet the doorknob had turned. I had seen it. Morning found me exhausted, nerves frayed to a razor's edge. I combed the house methodically, no sign of intrusion, no footprints in the thick dust. I was alone, or so logic demanded. Determined, I decided to investigate the well in daylight. The wooden planks covering its mouth were older than I'd thought, rotted, warped, and some recently disturbed. Dust lay scattered like breadcrumbs, telling stories I wasn't sure I wanted to read. I removed a plank, ignoring the trembling in my hands. A rush of cold, stale air met me from the darkness below, scented faintly with decay. I shone my flashlight in, but its beam swallowed by endless blackness. A sudden idea, the camera. I rigged a small digital camera with night vision to a rope, planning to lower it down without risking myself. Logic whispered that this was unnecessary, wells were common, harmless holes in the earth. But I could not forget the night's whispers, the turning doorknob, my uncle's journals. Carefully, I lowered the camera. 20 feet. 30, 50. How deep did this abyss go? Finally, the rope slackened, the camera had reached bottom. I waited, then pulled it up with sweaty, trembling hands. Back inside, I played the footage. Stone walls slid by, then darkness, complete, oppressive darkness. Just as I prepared to fast forward, a flicker caught my eye. 2 pinpricks of light, no, not reflections, but eyes. I enhanced the image. My blood ran cold. A figure stood at the bottom, human in shape, yet wrong. Too thin, unnervingly still. Eyes gleamed unnaturally in the infrared glow, watching, unblinking. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It simply stared at the camera, and through it, at me. I slammed the laptop shut, retreating as if the image itself was poison. My mind raced, tricks of light, camera faults, hallucination born of exhaustion. But none explained the suffocating dread filling my chest. Or the certainty that it had watched me since I arrived. That day passed in anxious obsession. Alternating between denial and compulsive review of the footage. In the clearest stills, the figure's edges blurred into shadow, except for those eyes, sharp, piercing, impossible to forget. I considered fleeing, abandoning this cursed inheritance and its dark burdens. But something, some thread of resolve or stubborn hope, held me here. Something held me there. Curiosity, or perhaps the whisper of inevitability, that running away wouldn't end this, that whatever had stirred would follow me, relentless and patient. In my uncle's study, I uncovered more journals, earlier entries from when he first arrived 15 years ago. His words echoed my own fears, names called in the night, strange sounds, the unshakable feeling of being watched. And always, the well. He wrote of desperate attempts to seal it, filling it with dirt, covering it with concrete, only to find the earth torn open anew, the barriers shattered as if something below rejected them fiercely. Eventually, he settled for rotting wooden boards, a feeble boundary, and began answering when his name was called. The journals grew stranger, tales of a bargain made in shadow, knowledge exchanged for companionship, secrets whispered from the darkness no living human should know. And in the final journal, written with trembling hand, he confessed to inviting me, to inherit not just the land, but the burden. He knew his time was ending. The thing in the well had told him so. It needed a new companion. Night fell with unnatural swiftness. I secured every door and window, bringing the journals and a kitchen knife into my bedroom, tiny shields against the unknown. Outside, the moon and stars hid behind heavy clouds, draping the farmhouse in an impenetrable darkness. Exhaustion claimed me after midnight. And then, the voice, my name, whispered not from outside, nor the hallway, but right beside my bed. A voice like stone grinding, water rushing over rocks, something ancient, unhuman. My eyes snapped open to darkness. The knife lay just inches away, but paralysis gripped me, whether from terror or some other power I could not name. Though I saw nothing, I felt a weight, cold, ancient, patient, pressing beside me. The voice came again, breathless but without breath. My name, close enough to feel on my skin, yet no warmth, only bone-deep cold that leached away heat. I tried to scream. My lungs betrayed me. Something cold and rough, neither solid nor absent, brushed my cheek. Then mercy, unconsciousness. I woke at dawn, aching as though I'd run for miles. The knife untouched. The room seemingly normal. Only a lingering chill whispered that the night had not been a dream. On shaky legs, I brewed coffee, grappling with the truth. I could leave, I should. But leaving would only postpone what was coming. Whatever had claimed my uncle had fixed its gaze on me. The inheritance, the invitation, all part of a design I was only beginning to see. My uncle's final words echoed in my mind, "It needs a new companion." Drawn by an invisible thread, I found myself at the well. The wooden boards lay scattered, though I'd replaced them carefully the day before. The opening yawned wide, darkness breathing into the morning air. There, descending into the depths, hung a rope ladder, old but sturdy, absent yesterday, yet unmistakably present now. An invitation. Scratched fresh into the stone rim was my name, raw, trembling marks etched by unseen hands. I stood frozen, staring into the abyss. The cold air carried whispers, almost words, brushing the edge of my mind, teasing the boundary between fear and understanding. I thought of my uncle, alone in this house for 15 long years, his only company the thing in the well. The bargain he had made, the secrets shared, the forbidden knowledge granted. His final act, bringing me here, preparing me to take his place. I should leave. Pack my bags, drive away, sell the property unseen, or better yet, burn the house and salt the earth where the well stands. The sane choice. The right choice. But here, in the growing light of dawn, the rope ladder sways gently as if beckoning me. I feel the weight of the unknown pressing in. What secrets lie below? What knowledge was worth my uncle's isolation and fate? What might be worth mine? I glance back at the house, the normal world beyond, the life I could return to. Then I look down into the well, into the darkness that calls my name in the night with a voice like stone and rushing water. I begin to understand why my uncle stayed. My hand reaches for the rope ladder almost of its own accord. The wood is smooth beneath my fingers, worn by countless climbs, I imagine. One rung. Then another. The sunlight above grows distant as I descend into cool darkness. Toward the figure I know waits below. Toward the eyes that gleam in the blackness. Toward answers, or madness, or something beyond either. The darkness rises to meet me like an old friend. And somewhere in its depths, the voice speaks my name once more. Story 9, The Silence Before the Bridge. The cold makes silence tangible. It crystallizes your breath and turns darkness into something you can almost touch. That is what I remember most about that night on the abandoned railway. The silence before everything began. I've always been drawn to forgotten places. Nature reclaiming what humans have left behind has a voice all its own. So, when I discovered the old tourist railway winding through the foothills just outside town, I couldn't resist. The line had been abandoned nearly 40 years, a once popular scenic route showcasing the area's beauty until financial woes closed it in the 1980s. By day, the trail was pleasant, rusted tracks peeking through tall grass, rotting ties beneath decades of rain and snow, broken signal posts standing like sentinels over the wild. But the real experience, I was told, came at night, when the forest swallows the railway in darkness and the boundary between past and present blurs. That's why, armed only with a flashlight and a dangerous curiosity, I found myself walking those tracks at 11:30 p.m. on a late October Tuesday. The temperature had dropped sharply after sunset, the air crisp and biting. My breath formed clouds that vanished into the darkness as I followed the path deeper into the forest, away from town's faint glow. The trail curved gently through towering pines, their silhouettes like watchful guardians. My flashlight caught glints of metal where the rails remained untarnished by rust. Moonlight filtered through branches, casting strange, shifting shadows on the forest floor. At 2 miles in, the forest opened to a trestle bridge spanning a shallow ravine. I checked my phone, no service, as expected, and noted the time, 12:14 a.m. The bridge looked solid enough, weathered wooden ties but intact. I swept my beam over the structure, watching the darkness swallowing the void beneath. Something about crossing that bridge made my skin prickle with unease. But I shrugged it off as the natural fear of being alone in the wild at night. The first sign something was wrong came as I reached the bridge's midpoint. At the midpoint of the trestle, the wood beneath my feet seemed to breathe. A subtle vibration, like the faintest pulse, echoed through the boards, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The forest fell into an unnatural stillness. Even the wind held its breath. My flashlight flickered. The beam wavered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to flicker beyond the edges of reason. I paused, heart hammering, ears straining for the familiar sounds of the wilderness. But there was only silence. Then, from the blackness below the bridge, a faint sound rose. Not quite a whisper, not quite a moan. A fragile, aching melody carried on the cold night air. It tugged at something deep inside me, a sorrowful call that pulled me closer to the edge. I stepped forward, hesitant but compelled. The track stretched ahead, empty and endless. Behind me, the forest loomed, dark and watchful. The temperature dropped again, a creeping cold that seeped through my clothes and into my bones. And then, as the melody grew louder, shapes began to form in the fog. Faint figures, ghostly outlines of passengers long gone, stood motionless on the rails. Their faces blurred, their eyes hollow, watching, waiting. My breath caught. I was no longer alone on the tracks. The ghostly figures moved neither toward nor away, merely existing, shadows caught between moments, trapped by memories they could not leave behind. Their eyes, hollow yet sorrowful, fixed on me with a silent plea, as if begging for recognition, for release. The melody swelled, weaving through the cold air like a mournful lullaby sung by the earth itself. A distant whistle echoed, faint but unmistakable, piercing the silence and stirring the air with an otherworldly chill. My heart thundered as the temperature plunged further, breath crystallizing in the frozen air. Each step I took on the ancient ties seemed to resonate with a hollow clang, as if the past itself echoed beneath my feet. Then, a figure detached from the others, more solid, more immediate. A woman in a faded dress, her eyes luminous pools of grief. She reached out, voice barely more than a whisper carried by the wind, "Do you see us? Will you remember?" I found myself nodding, unable to speak, feeling the weight of centuries of forgotten stories pressing upon my soul. In that moment, I understood, the railway was not just abandoned tracks and rusting rails. It was a bridge between worlds, a resting place for voices lost to time, waiting for someone to hear their stories once more. As I acknowledged the spirits, the air thickened with a weight I had not anticipated, an ancient sorrow settling into my bones. The ghosts no longer whispered from a distance, they surrounded me, their stories flooding my mind with vivid, fragmented visions. I saw moments of joy and tragedy long past. Children laughing on a summer's day, lovers parting at the station, a family torn apart by war. Each memory was a thread, weaving a tapestry of lives interrupted, voices silenced too soon. But with this gift came a price. Their grief seeped into me, an unshakable heaviness that shadowed my waking hours. Sleep became a tenuous refuge, invaded by dreams thick with echoes of loss and longing. Friends noticed the change, my eyes held distant shadows, my voice carried a tired weight. I found solace in solitude, drawn to the abandoned tracks as if tethered by invisible chains. The spirits had entrusted me with their stories, their memories preserved through my recognition. But their presence was a double-edged blade. To honor them was to carry their sorrow, to forget would be to condemn them to eternal silence. I realized then that the bridge was not merely a place, but a threshold, between life and death, memory and oblivion. By crossing it, I had opened myself to both worlds, forever changed. The days blurred as I walked the fine line between two realms, the living world beneath the sun, and the shadowed domain of memories and spirits that now inhabited my mind. I carried their stories like fragile glass, each one a precious shard reflecting pain, love, and loss. Sometimes, the weight threatened to crush me, the sorrow bleeding into my bones, making even the simplest moments heavy with grief. Yet, in honoring them, I found a strange solace, a connection that transcended loneliness, a purpose born from the silence they had suffered. I began to speak their names aloud, to write their stories, preserving the echoes that time sought to erase. In doing so, I created a bridge, not just for the spirits, but for myself, a passage from despair toward meaning. Friends who once feared my distant gaze now saw the spark of resilience behind my eyes. Though the burden remained, so did the light of knowing I was not alone in the unseen. The railway, the well, the shadows, they were threads woven into my own story now. I learned that sometimes to be haunted is to be chosen, and that the greatest courage lies in embracing the unknown with an open heart. In the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, I began to understand the true nature of the gift I'd received. The stories and memories were not chains, but keys to healing wounds long buried beneath silence and forgetting. I sought out others who listened, historians, spiritual guides, and those who felt the pull of places forgotten. Together, we created spaces where stories could be shared, voices honored, and memories kept alive. The railway became more than abandoned tracks, it blossomed into a living memorial, a place of pilgrimage and reflection. The well, once a source of dread, transformed into a sacred site, a reminder of the delicate balance between worlds and the power of remembrance. In opening myself to the unseen, I found a path to reconnect with the living. The shadows no longer haunted me but accompanied me, silent allies in a journey of compassion and understanding. With each story told, a piece of sorrow lifted, replaced by light and connection. The burden softened, not vanished, but woven into a tapestry of hope and resilience. I discovered that beyond the veil is not just darkness, but a realm of profound truth, a place where healing begins through remembering, honoring, and love. And so, I walk forward, guardian of memories, bridge between worlds, heart open to the whispers of the past and the promise of tomorrow. The final car glided past like a shadow of death itself. Its occupants were grotesque parodies of humanity, skin stretched taut over twisted bones, faces cracked and peeling like old paint. Hollow eye sockets leaked a darkness that seemed to swallow the faint blue glow whole. Their mouths hung slack, as if frozen mid-scream or mid-sorrow. Some reached out with skeletal hands pressed against the fogged glass, fingers curling as though desperate to grasp something just beyond reach, me. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of decay and cold earth. A low, keening wail began to rise, an unbearable sound carried on the wind, echoing from the train's depths. I forced my eyes closed, fighting the primal urge to flee. But even behind shut lids, the terrible gaze burned into my mind, etching itself deeper with every heartbeat. When I dared to look again, the train was gone. No echo, no fading lights, only the empty tracks and the chilling silence left in its wake. But the ground still trembled beneath my feet, and in the air hung the unmistakable feeling that I had been seen, marked, haunted. The night air felt colder still, as if the spectral train had drawn the warmth from the world itself. I stumbled away from the tracks, heart pounding not just from fear, but from a strange, lingering energy coursing beneath my skin. In the days that followed, the ordinary world began to unravel around me. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, whispers threaded through silence, and the weight of unseen eyes pressed on my back even in crowded rooms. Sleep became elusive. When it came, it was fractured by dreams of the ghostly train, its endless procession, the hollow gazes, the wailing that seeped into my bones. I found myself drawn compulsively back to the abandoned railway. Not out of curiosity, but because something inside me ached for resolution, for understanding. The more I resisted, the more persistent the pull grew, like a tether anchored deep within the earth and my soul. Friends and family noticed the change. They spoke softly of my withdrawn manner, the haunted look in my eyes. I brushed it off, but inside, I knew I was slipping away, caught between two worlds. The train had marked me, not just as a witness, but as a keeper of its silent stories. I carried their weight now, a burden woven into my very being. The date, October 23rd, etched itself into my mind like a curse. A century had passed since the tragedy, yet its shadows lingered, refusing to fade. The photographs were grim reminders of lives interrupted. Faces frozen in time, unaware of the fate that awaited them beyond the smile. Realized then that the train I had seen was no mere apparition. It was a spectral echo, a looping fragment of that final journey, forever replaying its last, agonizing moments. The passengers, caught between worlds, trapped in a cycle of sorrow and silence, had reached out, not in malice, but in desperate hope for recognition, for remembrance. And I had been their unwilling witness. Marked by the encounter, bound to carry their story forward. The weight of this knowledge settled over me like a shroud, heavy and unyielding. I was changed. Haunted not just by ghosts, but by the responsibility their presence demanded. The days after the encounter passed in a haze of reflection and unrest. I could no longer ignore the threads that now connected me to the lost souls on the tracks. Their silent pleas echoed in my waking moments and haunted my dreams, a persistent call for acknowledgement. To forget them would be to condemn them to eternal oblivion, an unforgivable cruelty. I sought out the local historical society again, this time with a different purpose. I wanted to uncover every detail, every forgotten name, to piece together their stories beyond the tragedy. In dusty archives and fading newspapers, I found fragments of lives, laughter, love, fear, and hope, all snatched away too soon. I began to write, to speak, to share. Holding memorials on the anniversary of the crash, inviting the town to remember and honor. With each story told, a veil seemed to lift, both from the town's past and from my own heart. The weight of the haunting softened, replaced by a quiet strength born of connection and compassion. I realized my role had shifted, from frightened witness to guardian of memory. A bridge between the living and the lost. And in that role, I found a new kind of peace, fragile, perhaps, but real. The next morning, I caught the building manager in the dim lobby. His gaunt face creased into a wary frown when I mentioned the window. That unit, he said quietly, has a history. Previous tenants left in a hurry. His eyes darted toward the cracked window frame, then back to me, as if weighing how much to reveal. I pressed for details, but he only offered vague warnings about the building's old bones and its quirks, creaks, drafts, and the occasional unexplained chill. Yet I sensed something unspoken lurking beneath his words, a story folded away in silence. That night, I secured the window with extra locks and a heavy bar I found in the maintenance closet. Yet in the stillness of early morning, the cold draft returned. I woke to the faint sound of scraping, soft, deliberate, like nails tracing the windowpane. The window was open again, wider this time, the heavy bar displaced as if by unseen hands. Fingertip marks glistened faintly on the glass, their shape too precise to be accidental. Fear threaded through my thoughts, but so did a strange compulsion to understand. Who or what was trying to enter, or perhaps, to leave? I began keeping a journal, noting each night's disturbances, the changing pattern of the marks, and the growing feeling of being watched. Neighbors spoke quietly of strange happenings in the building, whispered legends of past tenants who vanished or fled. The city's noise, once a comfort, now felt like a thin veil barely concealing something ancient and hungry. Night after night, the window became a silent battleground between me and something unseen. No matter how firmly I locked or barricaded it, come morning, it stood ajar, an open invitation to the cold, dark world beyond. Sometimes, when the city slept and the moon hung low, I thought I saw flickers of shadow dancing just beyond the glass, elusive and fleeting as smoke. Other times, a whispering wind carried faint murmurs that seemed almost like voices calling my name, or perhaps warning me away. Driven by equal parts fear and fascination, I installed a small camera facing the window, hoping to capture evidence of the intruder. The footage showed nothing but the play of night shadows, the subtle sway of curtains, and the occasional flutter of a bird outside. Yet, my dreams betrayed the truth. Each night, I descended into a waking nightmare where the window wasn't just a barrier but a portal, one I felt drawn to, compelled to cross. In those dreams, the city melted away, replaced by mist-shrouded streets and the echo of footsteps that weren't my own. I stood before the window, reaching toward a pale light beyond, feeling a cold hand brush mine. Awakening was always a struggle, heart pounding, limbs trembling, the line between dream and reality fraying thin. The building manager's warnings echoed in my mind, some places keep their secrets. Some windows don't just open, they invite. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to the city archives. The building's history stretched back nearly a century, once a bustling textile mill, then a neglected relic swallowed by urban sprawl. Among yellowed blueprints and forgotten permits, I found a mention of a tragic event tied to the very apartment I now called home. In 1927, a young woman named Evelyn Hartman had vanished without a trace. Neighbors at the time whispered of strange lights and sounds near her window, the same window I now feared. Some claimed she was drawn into the night by a mysterious presence, never to return. Theories abounded. Some believed Evelyn was taken by a malevolent spirit, others spoke of a secret passage within the building, a portal between worlds hidden behind the bricks and mortar. I felt the weight of her story pressing down on me, the same heavy silence that had settled in my apartment wrapping around my thoughts. The window was not simply old or faulty. It was a threshold, a fragile boundary where past and present, seen and unseen, intertwined. And now, with each unlocked latch and open pane, it seemed to beckon me toward a choice, to remain safely blind or to step beyond and confront whatever waited in the shadows. The window slid open fully, revealing not the alley I knew, but a void, a blackness so complete it swallowed every trace of shape or shadow. The chill that poured in was unlike any cold I'd ever felt. It seeped into my bones, carrying with it a silent, suffocating weight that pressed on my chest and whispered of things better left unseen. For a moment, I was frozen, caught between disbelief and terror. The camera kept rolling, capturing the impossible, an unseen force moving through the open window, invisible but undeniably there. The handprints on the sill from the previous morning suddenly made dreadful sense. Something had reached inside. Something had touched my world. In the following days, the window became a battleground of wills. No matter how many locks I installed, how many layers of tape and chains I applied, the window opened itself at precisely 3:33 a.m. every night, as though obeying some ancient, spectral clock. Each time, the darkness behind the pane grew thicker, more solid, as if something was pressing ever closer to crossing the threshold. Sleep became a distant memory. My dreams fractured into disjointed scenes, a cold hand brushing a cheek, whispers curling through the silence, and that endless darkness, always just beyond reach, calling my name with a voice like stone grinding against water. Yet, in the heart of this haunting, a fragile resolve took root. I realized this was more than a malevolent force, it was an invitation. An opportunity to confront the unknown and reclaim my peace. The window was not just a point of entry for fear, it was a door to truths hidden beneath the fabric of reality. With trembling hands, I began researching ancient rituals of protection and boundaries, prayers, symbols, and practices meant to guard against entities that slipped between worlds. I surrounded the window with salt, laid candles along the sill, and marked protective signs with chalk. Yet, each night at 3:33 a.m., the window defied every barrier, the darkness pressing insistently. One evening, I discovered an old diary tucked away in a forgotten drawer, its pages brittle with age. The author, a previous tenant from decades past, wrote of similar disturbances, a window that opened on its own, whispers that curled through the night air, and a presence both terrifying and sorrowful. They spoke of a lost soul trapped between realms, longing for release but bound by unfinished business. That realization shifted something within me. This was not a force bent on destruction but a restless echo, yearning to be seen, heard, understood. Summoning courage I didn't know I had, I sat before the window on the next night of reckoning. When the clock struck 3:33, I whispered into the thick darkness beyond the pane, offering presence, acknowledgement, and a promise to listen. The temperature dropped sharply, the room filling with a silence so deep it felt alive. Then, as if in response, a faint whisper flowed through the gap, a voice not of menace, but of sorrow and longing. From that moment, the haunting transformed. The window no longer opened unbidden, but only when I invited it. The darkness remained, a presence rather than a threat, a veil between worlds gently parted by understanding. Through that fragile connection, I began to glimpse memories of the past tenant, fragments of their story woven with mine, a reminder that healing often comes not from banishing shadows, but from embracing their truths. And slowly, in the stillness beyond the window, I found a pathway from fear toward peace. The narrow hallway beyond was swallowed by darkness, the faint glow of a distant street lamp barely penetrating the dense shadows. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, straining to catch the subtle rhythm of the footsteps. They paused, hesitated, then crept forward, slow, heavy, purposeful. The weight of each step echoed like a heartbeat in the stillness. A chill crept up my spine as I realized these were no ordinary footsteps. They carried the gravity of someone who had walked these halls for decades, someone bound by a ritual older than the hotel itself. The stories whispered by locals spoke of a tragic figure, a former guest who had vanished under mysterious circumstances, his spirit said to roam the corridors endlessly, searching for something lost. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. The door swung open with a reluctant creak, revealing an empty hallway bathed in a pale moonlight that filtered through stained glass windows. The air was thick with the scent of salt and old wood, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes watching from the darkness. As I stepped out, the footsteps resumed behind me, slower now, deliberate, never approaching, but never fading either. I turned, catching only the fading shadow at the corridor's end, a silhouette that flickered and dissolved like mist. With every breath, I felt the weight of the hotel's history pressing against me, the unseen presence beckoning me deeper into its secrets. The clock beside the bed chimed softly, its clear tones cutting through the thick silence. The creaking began once more, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the hallway, drawing nearer with a rhythmic certainty that seemed to pulse in sync with my pounding heart. I gripped the notepad tightly, words blurring as sweat dampened the page. My eyes were fixed on the door, barely daring to breathe. Then, a shadow flickered beneath the gap, long, thin, and impossibly still. Minutes passed, each stretched by unbearable tension. The footsteps slowed, paused, and I felt an icy breath brush against the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the brass knob, feeling the chill of the man who lingered just beyond. With a resolve born from desperation, I unwed-ged the chair and cracked the door open just enough to peer out. There he was, standing mere inches away, his gaunt face calm yet hollow, eyes fixed on some distant sorrow only he could see. The air between us felt heavy, laden with unspoken regrets and a lingering hope that death had not been the final chapter. I whispered, voice barely audible, "What are you waiting for?" The man's lips parted slowly, as if summoned by the question. "Her," he replied, voice a fragile wisp, "but she never came." A silence followed, thick and aching, and then, without warning, the figure slowly turned and began to fade, dissolving into the muted light of the hallway. Though the room grew quiet again, I knew the waiting was not over. The story of Thomas Marsh was unfinished, and somehow, I had become part of its next chapter. A cold draft brushed past me, whispering down the hallway like a sigh from another time. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with expectation. My heart pounded fiercely, every nerve alive with a mixture of fear and strange clarity. I stepped out, clutching Marsh's card tightly, and felt the weight of countless eyes, unseen yet undeniable, pressing in from the shadows that clung to the faded wallpaper and cracked molding. A soft rustling echoed from the far end of the corridor, faint footsteps almost inaudible. I followed, every step measured, every breath shallow. The hallway seemed to stretch impossibly longer, the walls bending subtly, as if the building itself was breathing, alive with memories. At the end of the hall, room 312 stood solemn and silent. The door was closed, yet I felt the pull of something behind it, a presence waiting, watching. I raised my hand and touched the cool brass knob, the metal humming faintly beneath my fingertips. Then, a voice, barely more than a whisper, echoed inside my mind. "You came." The door creaked open on its own, revealing a room suspended in time, dimly lit by a single lamp casting long shadows across a neatly made bed and the circles of business cards scattered on the floor, just as Miss Winters had described. In the center of the room, the air shimmered and took shape. Thomas Marsh emerged, no longer gaunt and hollow, but serene, as if freed from the endless weight. His eyes met mine, carrying the weight of years spent in loneliness and longing. I waited for her, he said softly, and then I waited for you. The story isn't just mine anymore. It's yours to tell, to carry forward. In that moment, I understood, this haunting wasn't just a ghost story. It was a passage, a bridge between despair and hope, loss and redemption. The Harborview's shadows were not meant to trap, but to teach, to guide those willing to listen. I stepped forward, no longer afraid, ready to write the next chapter. The cold breath caressed my skin like a whisper from the earth itself, unsettling yet oddly alive. It wasn't the natural chill of the cavern but something more deliberate, as if the cave exhaled secrets through that narrow opening. Mike had already disappeared into the darkness beyond the squeeze, his headlamp casting fleeting shadows on the rough stone walls. I hesitated, a flicker of ancient warning igniting deep within me. Some thresholds, I realized, are gates not just between spaces but between worlds. The air grew heavier as I pushed forward, every inch feeling like a step into a forgotten dream. The walls seemed to close in, the silence around me deepening, amplified by the absence of any other sound than the steady, rhythmic breath that followed me. Then, just beyond the gap, the passage opened into a cavernous chamber bathed in darkness so complete it swallowed the light. My headlamp flickered, struggling to penetrate the blackness. From the shadows, a faint pulse began, a low, steady heartbeat echoing through the stone. I felt it more than heard it, a thrum that vibrated through my bones and stirred something primordial inside me. The breath was not alone. Shapes emerged, indistinct at first, like shadows cast by an unseen fire. Figures moved within the darkness, ancient silhouettes with eyes that shimmered like molten silver, watching, waiting. Mike's voice called out, distant and strained, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. I stumbled forward, my heart a wild drum against the stillness, and with a final, reluctant breath, I stepped fully into the cavern's embrace, a place where time and space folded into the unknown. The deeper we moved along the chamber's edge, the more the whispers swelled and faded like restless ghosts stirring just beyond reach. The rhythmic pulse of the air seemed to synchronize with our own breathing, weaving an eerie, hypnotic cadence that tugged at the edges of my mind. Carved into the walls were more of those cryptic symbols, their forms growing more intricate and intertwining, like the language of something ancient, something not meant for human understanding. As I traced a swirling pattern, cold dread bloomed in my chest, a visceral sense that these markings were warnings, or perhaps invitations, etched by hands long vanished. Mike's flashlight flickered as he focused on a dark fissure opening between two limestone columns, a narrow tunnel disappearing further into the earth. "Should we see where this goes?" he asked, though the hesitation in his voice betrayed his unease. I nodded, feeling an undeniable pull toward that shadowed path, even as my body protested. The whispers grew louder here, shifting from unintelligible murmurs to faint fragments of words, voices overlapping in a chorus of sorrow, warning, and longing. It was as if the cave itself was alive, breathing stories into the air, desperate to be heard. Stepping into the narrow passage, the air thickened, the pulse turning into a steady, slow heartbeat. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness more absolute. Every step felt weighted, as if unseen eyes followed, unseen hands brushing against my skin like a cold breath. Then, from the blackness ahead, a single word emerged, clear and sharp, cutting through the murmurs: "Stay." The command wasn't spoken but felt, pressed into my mind like a cold hand, an ancient will reaching through time and space. I froze, heart pounding, caught between fear and a strange understanding. This cavern held secrets far beyond natural wonder, secrets that once unveiled could change everything I thought I knew about the world. Mike's voice broke through my trance. "We can't stay," he urged softly. "This place, it's wrong. We need to leave." But the cave's breath pulled deeper at me, and I realized this journey was no longer just about exploration. It was about facing something old, powerful, and waiting. The patterns on the water shifted and twisted, aligning with the carvings, as if the pool itself was a living canvas responding to the cave's whispered commands. The rhythmic pulse in the air slowed, becoming deliberate and ominous, like a heartbeat preparing for something inevitable. Mike and I exchanged a glance heavy with dread. The rational mind sought an explanation, underground currents, mineral deposits, light reflections, but the visceral fear grounding us in the moment defied all logic. The whispers now coalesced into fragmented phrases echoing in my mind. Release, blood, door. The cave seemed to breathe around us, alive with a hungry intelligence. The air thickened, pressing against my skin with the weight of centuries, as if the cavern itself demanded something long denied. Mike took a cautious step back. Maybe we should get out of here. Now. I nodded, but my eyes remained fixed on the pool's trembling surface. The symbols shifted again, and for a fleeting second, I glimpsed a face, ancient, sorrowful, trapped beneath the water like a ghost imprisoned in stone and liquid. The sensation was overwhelming, a mixture of sorrow and menace that reached into my very bones. We turned toward the exit, but the passage behind us seemed to close, the walls narrowing as shadows thickened, a silent warning not to leave so soon. Breathless, we hurried forward, the cave's pulse echoing in our ears, carrying the promise of secrets best left undisturbed, or horrors unleashed by their revelation. Outside, the cold night air hit my face like a baptism. The cave's whisper faded behind us, but its presence lingered, a scar on my soul. I knew this experience had changed something fundamental within me. The shadows of the cavern had reached inside, brushing against parts of me I had never acknowledged. And in the quiet moments, when the world dims and breath slows, I still hear the cave's rhythm, a reminder that some doors, once opened, never truly close. The faint sound, sharp, deliberate, unsettling, pierced the stillness of the night. It was just beyond the threshold of waking, the kind of noise that claws at the edge of consciousness, refusing to be ignored. I lay frozen beneath the thin covers, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought it was a nightmare bleeding into reality. But the scratching persisted, slow and methodical, creeping closer with every measured stroke. It traced an unseen path along the hallway walls outside my bedroom, an echo of a presence that was neither fully corporeal nor entirely absent. I told myself it was nothing, an old house settling, the work of the wind, the stray touch of a restless animal. But the sound had a rhythm, a cruel intention behind it that defied reason. On the second night, the scratching returned, louder and more insistent. I mustered the courage to slide from bed and press my ear against the door. The air was cold, the silence thick except for those torturous scratches. Then came a whisper, so faint I almost doubted it was real. A voice, hollow, ancient, murmuring a single word, wait. The days that followed were haunted by that command. Sleep became a fragile luxury, shattered by the return of the scratching, by fleeting glimpses of shadows that flickered just beyond the corner of my eye, always retreating when I turned to face them. The house, once a refuge from a chaotic world, transformed into a labyrinth of fear and unanswered questions. Doors creaked open of their own accord. Mirrors reflected moments that never happened. And always, at night, the relentless scratching. I began to research the house's past, uncovering stories that whispered of vanished occupants and unfinished business. The previous owner had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and locals spoke in hushed tones of a curse laid upon the property, a restless spirit bound by secrets it could no longer contain. But the scratching was not just a sound. It was a summons, a plea, a warning. It spoke of something waiting beyond the veil of our world, a darkness that fed on forgotten sorrows and unspoken fears. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than any night's cold, that this presence was not merely haunting the house, it was waiting for me. Night after night, the scratching grew more purposeful, as if it were charting a slow, torturous countdown. I started to notice other signs, cold spots that lingered longer than they should, objects subtly moved, photographs fading where the shadows touched them. My dreams became a tangled web of half-remembered voices, faces shrouded in mist, and that single, haunting word, wait. One evening, I found an old journal tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Its pages, yellowed and brittle, belonged to a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the house over a century ago. Her entries were filled with despair and hope intertwined. She spoke of a presence, a force that whispered in the dark, demanding a promise. Her final words were a chilling echo to what I now lived. The waiting is endless, but I fear my time has come. The house remembers, and so must I. That night, as the clock struck 3:17 a.m., the scratching crescendoed into frantic clawing at the walls. My door creaked open slowly, revealing a shadow, thin and elongated, pressing just beyond the threshold. The air grew dense, and the whisper transformed into a soft, sorrowful wail. It beckoned, not with menace, but with a deep, aching yearning, a desire to be heard, to be freed. I realized then that the house was not merely haunted by a restless spirit but was a vessel of unresolved memories and pain, waiting for someone to listen, to acknowledge its sorrow. With trembling hands, I stepped out into the dark hallway, heart pounding but mind strangely calm. The shadow awaited, no longer threatening but vulnerable. The weight of the watch in my palm was oddly grounding amid the swirling dread. The frozen time, 3:17, felt like a cruel joke, a marker etched into this hidden chamber's very essence. My fingers trembled as I flipped it open, revealing an inscription on the inside cover, barely legible beneath layers of grime. To those who listen, time is the prison. My breath caught, the words echoing in the still air like a whispered warning. I turned slowly, eyes scanning the walls dense with their chaotic carvings. The scratches writhed in the corners of my vision, unsettling patterns shifting just beyond focus, as if alive, breathing with the room itself. A sudden chill washed over me, the atmosphere thickening, oppressive yet almost sacred. It was then I noticed something else, a faint pulse, subtle but rhythmic, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet, in sync with the frozen hands of the watch. I sank down onto the floor, the cold wood biting through my jeans. Questions cascaded in my mind like a slow unraveling. Who had written these frantic messages? What had been trapped here? Was time itself fractured within these four walls? The silence deepened, broken only by the slow, persistent scratching, this time from just beyond the door. My pulse quickened. The door knob began to turn, slow and deliberate, though no wind stirred the stale air. Fear and a strange curiosity entwined inside me as the door creaked open to reveal not the cramped hidden chamber I just left, but a vast corridor glowing faintly with an ethereal light, like stepping into a place between worlds. And there, just beyond the threshold, I sensed a presence waiting, patient, ancient, and quietly desperate. The true prison wasn't just time, it was the stories left untold, the voices unheard, and the memories locked within these walls, yearning to be freed. The overwhelming presence of those photographs pressed against me like a suffocating weight. Each image seemed to trap a frozen moment in time, a silent witness to years of unseen watchfulness. The dark figure, though always just on the edge of clarity, became more tangible with each photo, as if it were slowly closing the distance between observer and observed. I moved further into the room, the floorboards creaking underfoot in a rhythm that felt far too deliberate. The stale air carried a faint metallic tang, a scent that unsettled me deeply. My flashlight trembled in my grasp, casting elongated shadows that danced along the collage, intertwining with the black silhouette. In the center of the far wall hung a larger framed photograph, distinct from the others. I stepped closer and recognized it immediately, a recent picture of me, sitting alone in my living room, back turned, unaware of the silent observer behind me. My breath hitched as a cold realization settled. This room was not merely a hidden space in my apartment, it was a shrine of surveillance, an archive of my life under watch. The scratching started again, sharper, urgent, coming now from the far corner of the room where the figure in the photos had appeared most often. Goosebumps erupted across my skin as I turned slowly toward the sound. A whisper threaded through the silence, barely audible yet unmistakably there, "Welcome home." The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the walls, sealing me inside the labyrinth of shadows and memories. A suffocating darkness began to pool in the corners of the room, swallowing the edges of the photographs and smudging the sharp lines into blurry shapes. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, each beat syncing with the creeping shadow that seemed to stretch and ripple along the walls, like ink spilled on fragile parchment. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for light, but the screen remained stubbornly black, dead as if the room itself had drained its power. The air thickened, heavy with a coldness that seeped into my bones, and a faint, metallic whisper curled around me like smoke. "Do you see?" the voice breathed, "closer now, resonant and hollow, we have watched long enough. It is time." My breath caught. I wanted to run, to tear open that door and escape back to the familiar world beyond, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The photographs pulsed softly, their images shifting as if alive, faces turning, eyes blinking, shadows twisting into forms that reached for me beyond the frame. The dark figure began to take shape in the far corner, its form coalescing into something both human and impossibly alien. No eyes, yet I felt it pierce through me, seeing my every fear, my every secret. "You cannot hide anymore," the voice whispered again, "the watcher becomes the watched." I closed my eyes, summoning the last shreds of courage, and when I opened them, the room was flooded with a blinding white light that surged from my phone's flashlight, cutting through the darkness like a sword. The figure recoiled, writhing as if burned by the light, its edges unraveling into tendrils of smoke that dissipated into the shadows. The door behind me creaked open, beckoning, a promise of freedom or perhaps a passage deeper into the unknown. I took a trembling step forward, knowing that the path ahead was uncertain, but also that remaining trapped in this room meant surrendering to the darkness that had haunted me for too long. As I crossed the threshold, the whisper faded, replaced by a gentle silence, an invitation to reclaim myself from the shadows. The apartment was no longer just a space I inhabited, it was alive, shifting and breathing with a will of its own. The yellow door was a gateway, a threshold between the world I knew and a realm where time warped and reality fractured. The pocket watch, always present, was more than a token or a relic. It was a countdown, a heart beating in sync with this mysterious space's rhythm. Every tick drew me closer to something inevitable, a moment when the door would no longer open, or when it would open to something I could no longer resist. I stood at the edge of that abyss, the faint, ghostly echoes of whispered voices curling around me, tugging at my mind. I realized then that the door's migrations were not random. They were calls, invitations, or warnings. Each time it appeared in a new place, it was offering a choice, to confront what lurked beyond or to remain trapped in a world slowly unraveling around me. The infinite chamber stretched on, dark and unknowable, yet filled with an uncanny familiarity. It was as if the space was an extension of my own fears, regrets, and memories, warped and magnified. And in that vastness, I sensed the presence of others, shadows of those who had come before, who had answered the door's call, and were now forever part of its shifting realm. The scratching behind the walls was no longer just a sound, it was a voice. A lament. A beckoning. I knew that soon, the pocket watch's hands would reach midnight. And when they did, I would have to decide, stay trapped in this ever-changing labyrinth of time and memory, or step fully through the yellow door into the unknown, whatever that might be. With a deep breath, I took my first tentative step forward into the darkness beyond, surrendering to the mystery that had claimed me. The snow was too fresh for that, I thought. The weather had been clear and still for days, no wind to erase footprints, no storm to cover them up. And yet there they were, perfectly formed, precise human footprints, leading deeper into the woods as if inviting me to follow. My heart pounded, torn between the urge to stay safe inside and the irresistible pull of curiosity. I hesitated only moments before stepping onto the snow, carefully placing my boots into the first print. The cold bit through my gloves as I followed the path, each step a quiet crunch that echoed unnaturally in the stillness. The tracks did not waver, did not falter, heading straight into the dense forest as though guiding me to some unseen destination. The trees thickened, towering pines casting long shadows under the moonlight. A strange silence blanketed the woods, deeper than any natural quiet, a silence that felt watchful, waiting. My breath came in ragged gasps, my senses alert to every snap of twig, every rustle of leaves. But the footprints remained, unwavering, untouched by wind or animal. Then, as I reached a small clearing, the trail abruptly ended. No footprints beyond this point, no disturbance in the snow. Just an untouched patch, smooth and pure as if time itself had stopped here. And there, in the center of the clearing, stood a figure. At first, I thought it was a man. Tall, slender, cloaked in shadows deeper than the night around him. But the details were wrong, too perfect, too still, as if carved from the darkness itself. The moonlight failed to touch him, leaving only an outline of absence where he stood. I felt the cold press harder, not just in the air, but inside my bones. The forest seemed to inhale, holding its breath. The figure spoke, not with words, but a sensation, a weight pressing on my mind, as ancient and slow as the glaciers beyond the mountains. "Why do you follow?" the darkness asked without sound. I wanted to turn and run, to flee back to the safety of the cabin and the firelight. Yet my feet remained rooted, caught between fear and fascination. "I don't know," I whispered into the night, voice trembling. The figure's presence grew, a shiver that rippled through the earth, stirring the snow at my feet. "You seek answers," it said, still without sound, but answers come at a cost. The air thickened as the moonlight dimmed, shadows gathering like storm clouds. In that frozen clearing, beneath the vast Patagonian sky, I realized I had crossed a threshold. The footprints were no longer just a path through the snow, they were a summons, a chain pulling me toward a truth far older and deeper than the mountains themselves. I turned back then, heart heavy but mind alight with the haunting knowledge that some mysteries are invitations to transformation, and some steps into darkness are the first toward light. A faint shimmer hung in the air, like a heat haze or the distorted surface of water. But the temperature was frigid, and the forest around me was still, untouched by wind. The shimmer grew, rippling softly, as though the fabric of reality itself was bending and folding. Then, through the wavering veil, I saw a doorway, not made of wood or stone, but of shifting light and shadow. It stood between two ancient trees, tall and impossibly slender, as if the forest had stretched itself to create a passage to another world. The edges of the doorway were fractal, endlessly repeating, and the space beyond appeared both impossibly distant and heartbreakingly close. A voice echoed in my mind, carried on the cold breath that swirled around me. It was neither threatening nor kind, simply patient, timeless, inviting. "Step through," it whispered. "The path awaits." I hesitated, the full weight of what this meant pressing upon me. To cross this threshold was to leave behind the known, to embrace mystery beyond all understanding. And yet, the footprints had led me here, night after night, pulling me towards something I couldn't yet name but felt deeply. My hand reached out instinctively, trembling as I passed through the shimmering veil. The cold clung to me, but warmth, strange and faint, blossomed from within. As I stepped beyond, the world shifted. The trees, the snow, the night sky dissolved into a vast expanse of swirling colors and infinite depth. I was no longer in Patagonia, or perhaps I was, but seen through the eyes of eternity. Here, time was fluid, a river winding through uncounted realms. The air hummed with stories long forgotten and futures yet to unfold. In that place beyond the veil, I understood, some footprints are not just marks in the snow. They are invitations to transformation, echoes of a deeper journey that calls us beyond fear, beyond the cold, into the radiant unknown. And as I ventured further, the voice was no longer a whisper but a song, an ancient, healing melody that promised that even in the darkest cold, there is light waiting to be found. The truth crashed down upon me with the weight of 1,000 storms. I was not merely following the tracks, I was creating them, looping endlessly between worlds, caught in a spiral that defied time and space. Each night, my body walked the impossible path, slipping through the folds of reality without memory, drawn by a force older than reason. The figure inside the cabin, myself, now stared directly at the window, eyes void and unblinking. It was a reflection not of who I was, but of what I was becoming. A shadow tethered to this place, a vessel caught between dimensions. As I retreated into the twisted forest, the cold seemed to grow heavier, pressing in on my lungs, whispering promises and threats all at once. The trees around me bent and shimmered like liquid glass, fracturing the night into shards of fractured light. And in that fractured light, I glimpsed other figures, others caught in similar spirals, wandering unseen paths carved by footprints that led nowhere but deeper into the veil. Yet, even as the darkness pulled at me, a faint thread of hope remained, a whisper from the deepest part of my being. Perhaps this journey, terrifying and disorienting as it was also an initiation. A passage through fear into understanding. A chance to unravel the mystery not only of the tracks or the cabin, but of myself. With trembling resolve, I took a breath heavy with cold and stepped forward again, into the shimmering corridor between worlds, seeking the path that might lead me home, or to something beyond all imagining. In the stillness of that impossible forest, a profound resignation settled within me, an acceptance of the paradox that had become my existence. I was both the seeker and the sought, the hunter and the hunted, endlessly retracing steps that belonged not just to me, but to versions of myself scattered across dimensions folded like pages in an ancient book. The cold, once sharp and biting, had transformed into a companion, a silent witness to the unraveling of identity. Each breath I drew felt less like life and more like a tether, binding me to a reality that was both familiar and alien. And yet, amidst the endless repetition, a fragile thread of hope glimmered. Maybe this cycle was not merely a curse, but an invitation, a call to awaken from the illusion of singularity and embrace the complex tapestry of selfhood woven through time and space. Tomorrow night, I would watch. I would wait. And perhaps, in the silent communion with my other selves, I might discover a path not just through this twisted geometry, but beyond it, toward freedom, understanding, and a home I had never known I was searching for.